I never meant to steal his son, I only meant to save him. But 6 months later, the most feared Mafia king in Italy found me, and now I'm locked inside his empire, with the baby I took and the man I shouldn't want. This isn't just a story, this is a confession, and you're about to hear every breath of it. Let him tell you how he felt before I tell you my side of the story.
I've heard people say grief is a dull ache. They're liars. Mine was sharp, bloody. A blade turned inward and twisted until it carved out every part of me that had ever felt hope. And then, just when the silence of death settled in, it took more. My name is Andrea Marcorelli. I am 34 years old, and 6 months ago, I held my wife's lifeless hand while she bled out on the delivery table. I felt her fingers go cold. I kissed her knuckles and told her I was sorry, even though it was too late. And my son was stolen before I ever held him. No ransom, no trace, not even a whisper from the monsters who took him. I burned half of Naples in the weeks that followed. Allies turned into ash. Enemies vanished without bones. My empire, the one I inherited through decades of blood, became a hunting ground. My consigliere said I was unraveling. He was right, because without her, without the child we made, there was no reason to hold the crown. Dadora, I muttered through gritted teeth the night she died, hands soaked in her blood. Fix her. But he couldn't. No one could. Even now, 6 months later, the smell of that room haunts me. Antiseptic, iron, roses wilting in a vase by the window. I left them there. Told the hospital to keep the room locked and untouched. I wanted it to rot, just like the part of me that died inside it. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. Thunder growled over the hills, a warning of another storm coming. The estate was dark, except for the warm glow of my study, the only place I still existed like a man and not a ghost. I sat at the desk, staring at the file I'd already memorized 100 times. Security footage, timelines, staff records, disappearances, dead ends. Every detail led nowhere, until tonight. The door creaked open. Luca stepped in, slow and hesitant. He never hesitated. Not around me. Not unless... What? My voice came out hoarse, more growl than word. He closed the door behind him and set a folder on the desk. Fresh, still warm from the printer. I think we found her. The words didn't land at first. They hovered in the air like smoke, choking out the silence. My pulse didn't race. My breath didn't catch. I just stared. Then I opened it. Photo 1. A woman. Blonde hair tucked under a baseball cap. Dark glasses. A worn blue hoodie. Carrying a baby. Photo 2. Same woman. No glasses. Her face clearer. Freckles. American features. Cautious, but not paranoid. She looked maternal, not like a threat. She's been living in Calabria under the name Elise Carter, Luca said quietly. No official records before 6 months ago. No passport. No bank accounts. But she had help. Someone faked the documents. I flipped to the next page. The baby. Sleeping in a stroller. Same bone structure. Dark hair, just like me. Dimple on the left cheek. About 6 months old. I stared at him until my vision blurred. DNA? I rasped. Not yet. But Andrea. Luca hesitated, then whispered, It's him. I'd bet my life. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Because something twisted in my chest. A soundless scream that had been buried for 6 goddamn months. Alive. My son is alive. I moved like a machine. Call the team. Clear the airstrip. Prepare the jet. Wake the pilot. We were in the air within the hour. The flight was quiet. My mind wasn't. I tried to imagine what I would say to her. This woman who took my child from his blood, who watched me spiral through grief while hiding the only piece of my wife I had left. But the truth was, I didn't know if I would speak at all. I didn't trust myself, because rage like mine didn't simmer. It exploded. We landed just after midnight. Her safe house, if you could call it that, was tucked behind a bakery in a fishing village so quiet it could have been a ghost town. Luca's men had eyes on her all day. She hadn't run. She hadn't even noticed. Rookie mistake. I didn't knock when I entered. The front door shattered inward under my boot. She screamed. I followed the sound to the back room. Small, warm, lit only by a salt lamp glowing orange beside a crib. She stood between me and the child, hands raised, eyes wide. Don't, please. He's just a baby. Her voice cut through me like a blade. High, breathless, protective, like she cared. I stalked forward. My men flanked the room, weapons ready but unnecessary. You stole from me. She didn't deny it, didn't beg, just trembled. Let me explain, she whispered. No. My voice was ice. You don't speak until I tell you to. I moved past her, looked down into the crib. The child blinked up at me, unfazed. His eyes were dark, just like mine. just like hers. He reached out, tiny fingers brushing mine, and for the first time in 6 months, I breathed. Behind me, she sobbed softly. I turned. She flinched when our eyes met. You took my son, I said. I saved him. Silence stretched between us, crackling with 1,000 unsaid things. But I didn't ask what she meant. Not yet. Instead, I said the one thing I hadn't planned. The one thing I never thought I'd say. She stays. Lucas stiffened. Boss? She stays, I repeated, stepping between her and the door. And if anyone touches her, they answer to me. Because I needed answers. Because I needed to know why she risked everything to steal the heir to the Marcorelli empire. But more than that, I needed to know why. Looking into her eyes didn't feel like hate. It felt like fate.
So now you know what he was thinking. Let me tell you what really happened. Let's begin. I didn't plan to steal a baby. I didn't wake up that night thinking I'd commit a federal crime, betray a Mafia family, and go on the run with a child who wasn't mine. But when I looked into that newborn's face, purple and screaming, tiny chest heaving with the effort to survive, and saw the machine's flatline behind his mother's lifeless body, I knew. If I left him there, he'd be next. So I ran, and I never looked back. I changed my name before I left Naples, bought forged papers, used burner phones and hidden cash from a desperate favor I never planned to cash in. I dyed my hair, deleted my past, told the world I was Elise Carter, single mother, widow, quiet, invisible. But I still checked the news every night, read between the headlines, tracked the Marcorelli body count like it was a weather report. Andrea had scorched the earth. And every time I saw a new name listed under the presumed dead column, I whispered an apology to the baby sleeping beside me. I'm sorry your father's a monster, I'd say. But I had to save you from becoming one, too. I didn't hear them enter. 1 second, I was spooning applesauce into Marco's mouth. Yes, I named him. I gave him a name. The next, my front door exploded inward like a bomb had gone off, shouting. Boots. Guns. Black-clad men filling my tiny safe house like shadows pouring into every corner. I froze. My breath caught. Marco whimpered in his high chair, and then he screamed. I ran to him without thinking, grabbing him into my arms, shielding his body with mine as the men closed in. I ran and put him in his crib. Please, I gasped. He's just a baby, don't. That's when I saw him. Andrea, alive, taller than I remembered, broader, terrifying. He looked like grief carved into a man's body. Hollow-eyed, silent, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles ripple. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he just looked at me. And I swear, I stopped breathing. He walked past me without a word, right to the crib. Marco stared up at him like he'd always known, and Andrea reached out, touched his fingers, and everything in the room shifted. His men fell silent. I did too, because the air changed, like something dangerous had just found the only thing it couldn't live without. You took my son, he said, voice low and lethal. I forced myself to meet his eyes. I saved him. That was the truth. It was the only truth I had. But it wasn't enough. He stared at me like he was deciding which bone to break first. Then he turned to his men. She stays. What? No. You can't. You don't get to keep me here. Andrea turned slowly, one brow lifting. I don't? His tone was soft, mocking, cold. You're not God, I snapped. His gaze dropped to the baby. No, but I am his father, and that makes me something worse. They took me that night, not in chains, not in cuffs, but in silence. I lifted Marco in my arms and held him close to my chest. One of the guards reached out to take the baby. I flinched so hard my knees buckled. Andrea's voice cut through the room like a blade. Don't touch her. His man froze. I couldn't believe it. But he didn't argue. He stepped back. Andrea looked at me, his voice steady and low. You hold him. You ride with me. Why? So I wouldn't run? Or because he knew I'd claw someone's eyes out before letting Marco go? Either way, I didn't speak again until we reached the estate. The drive was endless. My heart never slowed. I sat stiff in the leather seat, clutching Marco while Andrea sat beside me in still, simmering silence. I kept my head turned to the window, but I felt his eyes on me the whole time. Not just watching, studying, like he was trying to read the motive behind every breath I took. Why? He finally asked, voice like steel. I didn't answer, because the truth wasn't simple. Because the truth could still get me killed. So I stared out into the dark and said nothing. The gates of the Marcorelli compound opened like the jaws of a beast. Lights, walls, guards everywhere. We drove through layers of security thicker than any fortress, and when we stopped in front of the main house, palatial, old, beautiful in a dangerous way, Andrea opened the door and motioned for me to follow. Still holding Marco, I stepped out. He didn't touch me, didn't threaten, just walked ahead expecting me to follow. I did. What choice did I have? Inside, the estate was warmer than I expected. Gold-trimmed walls, marble floors, crystal chandeliers glittering like ice, and silence. So much silence. He led me up a curved staircase and down a long hall, opened a door at the end. The room was soft, rich, cream sheets, mahogany crib already waiting. It looked maternal. My chest ached. "You knew I was coming," I said quietly. "I hoped." He turned to me, slow and deliberate, his eyes locked on mine. "Put him down," he said. My arms tightened instinctively. He didn't repeat the command. He just stepped forward, so close I could smell the storm on his coat, and looked down at the child in my arms. "I won't hurt him," he said. "You know that." I did. God help me. I did. So I crossed the room and laid Marco gently in the crib. He sighed in his sleep, fingers curling like he was dreaming. I turned, and Andrea was still watching me, still quiet, still dangerous, and I was still standing. "What happens now?" I asked, his head tilted slightly. "Now?" He stepped forward, gaze searing through me. "Now you tell me everything." I swallowed hard and whispered, then closed the door. Because if I was going to tell him how his wife died, how the baby was meant to follow, how the order came from inside his empire, then I was going to need a locked room and the devil himself to listen. I knew the second the door closed behind us that I wasn't walking out of that room unchanged. He didn't speak. Not right away. Just stood there watching me like he expected my confession to burn. And maybe it would. I kept my back to the door, one hand still resting on the crib's edge. Even though Marco was sound asleep, I needed the anchor. Something soft. Innocent. Real. Because Andrea Marcorelli wasn't real. He was a myth made of bone and blood, sharpened by loss and crowned in fear. And now, he was mine to answer to. "I was working the night she died," I began, voice quiet. "I was the night shift NICU nurse. They called me down because she was crashing." His face didn't move. Not a twitch, not even a blink. She was bleeding too fast. I asked why there was no OB, no attending, no surgical team. They said she came in private, quiet, that her husband handled everything. His jaw flexed. I kept going. She was terrified, barely conscious. She kept whispering one thing over and over. I looked up, my throat closing around the memory. "Don't let them take him." Andrea's breath caught, just once, but it was enough. "She knew," I said softly. "She knew someone was coming for him. She must have suspected before that night, but by the time she was dying, she was sure." "She didn't tell me," he said, voice raw. "Not once." "She couldn't. Someone made sure she was alone, someone who wanted the baby to be born without witnesses, who didn't plan on either of them surviving." I didn't have to say it outright. He wasn't stupid. He saw the holes in his empire, the cracks only visible from the inside. And now, they were swallowing him whole. "They wanted the baby dead?" he asked, voice like a blade pressed to skin. I nodded. "And you?" "I wasn't supposed to be there," I whispered. But I was, and when they pronounced her dead and the baby started coding, I acted. I took him straight to NICU, hid him under another name. They told me to list him as deceased. I didn't. "You forged records," he said. "I lied," I replied. "I ran." Finally he moved, slow steps toward me, predator silent, rage simmering beneath every inch of him. "And you never thought to tell me?" "You were breaking the city in half," I snapped. "Your men killed 3 doctors and a midwife in the first month. You weren't asking questions, Andrea. You were hunting." He stopped inches away, close enough for me to feel the heat of him. "I deserved to know," he said. "I know." "You took my son. I saved him." "Wait. Before I say what happened next, are you the type to run or the type to stay? 'Cause I thought I would run. Now, let's get back to my mistake." His hand hit the wall beside my head, not touching me, but close enough. I didn't flinch, not this time. "I should kill you," he said, low and vicious. "Every part of me says to end you right here." I lifted my chin. "Then do it." Silence. His chest rose once, twice. His eyes never left mine. Then his voice changed, rougher, quieter. "I held her hand while she died. She never got to name him." My throat ached. "I did," I whispered. "I gave him one." He looked at me like I'd just ripped his soul in two. "What?" "Marco." His eyes shut, just for a second. Then he opened them, and they were full of something I hadn't seen before. Grief, gratitude, fury, love. Not for me, for the child who bore his name without ever knowing it came from blood. "I want him protected," he said, stepping back. "Locked compound, armed guards, round-the-clock surveillance. He's a baby, not a weapon." "No," Andrea murmured, "he's both." My spine stiffened. "Then you're no better than the ones who tried to kill him." He turned fast. "I'm worse." The way he said it, no hesitation, made the hair on my arms rise. But then he looked at me, something colder setting in behind his eyes. "You're not leaving." I froze. "What?" "You heard me. You said I could explain, not that you were keeping me." "I said you stay, and I meant it. You can't keep me here," I whispered, blood draining from my face. He walked toward me again, slow, deliberate, like a man claiming territory. "I can. I will. And if you try to leave, I will find you." "And then what?" I hissed. "You'll lock me in a tower? Chain me to a crib? I'll bury anyone who helps you." The words weren't a threat. They were a promise. I stepped back, breath shaky. "You're insane." "I'm a father," he said, "a real one. And that means my son doesn't grow up without his mother, or with a woman who thinks she can run when it gets hard." "You think this is easy for me?" I choked. "I gave up my life to protect him, and now you'll give it up again." He moved to the door, opened it, paused. "Clean clothes are in the closet. Don't try to leave. My men will shoot first and apologize later." Then he was gone. The door shut, and I stood in a gilded cage, holding onto a name that wasn't mine and a child who no longer belonged to me. I didn't cry, not then, but I curled into the corner that night and whispered to Marco in the dark, "I think I made a mistake." Because I didn't just walk into the lion's den, I stole his cub, and now the lion was watching me sleep. I woke to silence, no crying, no footsteps, just the eerie, unnatural kind of quiet that felt intentional, manufactured, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. For a moment I forgot where I was. Then I sat up and remembered everything. The compound, Andrea, his eyes when I said the name Marco, his voice when he told me I wasn't leaving. I blinked hard, trying to clear the fog in my head, but even the air felt thick in this room. Too soft, too clean. Like the kind of luxury that wanted to lull you into forgetting it was a prison. Marco stirred in the bassinet beside me, safe, fed, watched probably, because I knew better than to think I was alone. The clothes in the closet still had tags, designer labels I'd only seen in magazines, silk, wool, hand-stitched, everything. Nothing I'd ever put on my body in the real world. I chose a sweater, pulled on leggings, flat boots, dressed like someone who wanted to blend in. But here, that wasn't possible. This wasn't my world. This was his, and he wanted me to remember that. When I opened the door, there were 2 guards in the hall. Not thugs, suits, comms in their ears, weapons discreet but not hidden. One of them nodded toward the stairwell. "Don Marcorelli is waiting for you." Don, not Andrea. Right. I was in his house now. The dining room was something out of a royal estate. High ceilings, gold-framed art, fresh flowers that probably cost more than my car used to, and him at the head of the table in a dark button-down and a watch that probably belonged in a museum. He didn't look up when I entered. Just sipped his espresso, read a file, owned the world without needing to speak. Marco shifted on my hip, and that got his attention. His eyes lifted, landed on his son, and for a second, just a breath, something raw and unguarded passed through them. Then it was gone. "Sit." I did. But only because standing made me feel like I was about to bolt. The table had already been set for 2. Porridge, toast, coffee, fresh fruit, not a trap, not poisoned, but not comfort either. This wasn't kindness, it was a statement. He'd already decided we were staying. "I had a crib brought up," he said, still flipping pages in the folder. "Sound monitors installed. The guard rotation outside your door has doubled." I swallowed hard. "Because you think I'll run?" He finally looked at me. "No, because I know someone will come for you." My blood ran cold. "You think the same people who tried to kill Marco? We'll try again." He folded the file closed and pushed it aside. "And now they'll come through you." I stared at my plate, suddenly unable to eat. "Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. "Because the sooner you stop pretending you're a guest, the safer you'll be." He stood, rounded the table, and stopped behind me. Too close. My spine stiffened. His fingers brushed my shoulder, not possessive, but intentional. "You walked into my world when you took him," he said, low. "You don't walk out." I turned, eyes meeting his. I didn't take him to hurt you. No, he said softly. You took him to protect him. I see that now. He stepped closer, his voice darkened. But if you ever try to take him from me again, there won't be a room in this world you can hide in. He left me there. Not in chains, not in silence, but in something worse. His attention. The next 2 days blurred, guards everywhere, meals delivered. Marco never left my side, but I could feel the invisible threads tightening. Every hallway was watched, every movement recorded. And Andrea kept watching me. Not directly, but I felt him in the reflection of every window, in the way the house shifted when he entered, in the way the staff paused mid-step the second they heard his voice. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he didn't have to. This place breathed for him. On the third morning, I tried to open a window. It was sealed, not painted shut. Sealed. A chill ran down my spine. The cage was beautiful, but it was still a cage. That night, I stepped out into the hallway with Marco and caught the last thing I ever expected to see. Andrea. Alone. In the nursery. He didn't notice me right away. His back was turned, his shoulders tense. He stood over the crib, our son already asleep, and just stared. No movement, no sound, just this quiet ache in his posture, like he was trying to memorize every detail in case it disappeared again. I didn't move. I should have. But then he spoke. Soft. Haunted. I never got to name him. I exhaled. He has one. He turned slowly. His expression was unreadable. You still call him that? Yes. A long pause stretched between us. Then, without taking his eyes off me, he said, Good. I waited for him to leave. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped toward me, closer than we'd been since that night, and let his gaze drag over my face like he was searching for something hidden beneath it. I don't trust you, he said. I know. But I don't hate you either. That surprised me more than it should have. You should. He smiled. It was cold, sharp, not kind. No, he said, stepping past me. Hate is simple, and nothing about you is simple. As he walked away, I stood frozen in the hall with Marco in my arms, because that wasn't just a threat or a warning. It was something far more dangerous. It was interest, and in a house like this, from a man like him, interest could burn the whole world down. The first shot shattered a window. Not a warning, not a test. A clean, precise crack followed by the scream of glass and the thunder of Marco's cry in my arms. I moved before I thought. My body reacted the way it always had in emergencies. Trained, ruthless, fast. I turned, shielding him with my chest, diving behind the heavy armchair as another shot tore through the wall where his crib had been seconds earlier. Marco, shh, shh, I whispered, heart slamming against my ribs. The alarms didn't sound right away. That told me everything. This wasn't an outside breach. This was inside. Protect the air. Andrea's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and absolute, carrying down the hall like a command that bent men to it. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, shouting, footsteps pounding marble. I curled around Marco, pressing his face into my neck, breathing him in, warm milk, soap, life, while the walls of the silk cage finally showed their teeth. A body hit the floor outside the door. Then another. Andrea appeared in the doorway, gun raised, eyes blazing as he scanned the room. When he saw us, something savage crossed his face. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and crouched in front of me, one hand gripping my shoulder, not rough, not gentle. Anchoring. Are you hit? I shook my head. Marco screamed. Andrea didn't flinch. He lifted his coat, wrapped it around Marco with hands that didn't tremble, then pressed his forehead briefly to his son's hair, just for a breath. Then the dawn was back. Move, he ordered. Now. They rushed us through back corridors I hadn't known existed, down narrow stairs, past reinforced doors that slammed shut behind us with the sound of finality. The safe room was cold steel and concrete, no windows, one table, cameras lining the ceiling. Andrea locked the door himself. Only then did the world slow. Marco hiccuped against my chest, his cries easing as I rocked him, murmuring nonsense through a throat tight with terror. Andrea stood across from us, gun still in hand, jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might crack. Who? He demanded. I swallowed. They weren't aiming at me. His eyes snapped to mine. They aimed for the crib, I continued, voice steady now, all the fear compressed into a hard, sharp line inside me. They knew where he'd be. Andrea's silence was deadly. You were wrong, I said quietly. It wasn't just a warning 6 months ago. This didn't start with me. He stepped closer. How? I met his gaze. Because your wife wasn't supposed to survive labor. The room went still. Andrea's breath left him in a slow, dangerous exhale. What did you just say? I told him everything. About the missing OB team. About the forged medication orders that thinned her blood. About the man who tried to sign the death certificate before the baby had even taken a breath. About the order buried in hospital administration files to list the infant as stillborn. I told him about the call I intercepted. Low voices, rushed Italian, talking about closing the bloodline. And I told him why I ran. Because if they could kill her in a private hospital wing, I said, they could kill him anywhere, including in your house. Andrea turned away from me, put both hands on the table. The gun clattered as he dropped it, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw the man beneath the crown fracture. Not break. Fracture. I searched for traitors outside my walls, he said slowly. I never thought to look at the ones who stayed. I said nothing, because now he understood. The door opened. Luca stepped in, face grim. They were internal, he confirmed. 2 guards, 1 medic, all tied to the Santori family. We neutralized them. Andrea nodded once. Burn their houses, he said. Erase their names. Luca hesitated. Andrea, there's more. Andrea didn't turn. The Santoris believed the heir was cursed. They thought if the child lived, you'd go to war for him. Andrea finally faced us again. They were right. After the door closed, silence rushed back in. Andrea looked at Marco, sleeping now, exhausted by fear, and something shifted in his expression, something irreversible. You saved him, he said quietly. I nodded. And you saved me from becoming blind, he added. My throat tightened. I didn't mean to. Don't, he interrupted. You did what my empire failed to do. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell the gunpowder still clinging to his coat, hear the controlled violence in his breathing. I owe you, he said. I laughed weakly. You're holding me prisoner. No, his eyes locked onto mine. I'm keeping you alive. He reached out, not to me, but to Marco. His finger brushed his son's tiny hand. Marco curled around it instinctively. Andrea stilled, and for a heartbeat the dawn disappeared entirely. In his place stood a man who had almost lost everything. I will end this, he said, voice low and ironclad. For him. For her. He glanced at me. And for you. I stiffened. I didn't ask for that. I know. His hand withdrew. But you'll have it anyway. They moved us deeper into the compound that night. Thicker walls, more guards, no windows at all. Andrea watched the door seal behind us, then turned to me. You stay close to me from now on. Because I know too much? Because they'll come again, he said. And when they do, they'll try to take you before they try to take him. My heart skipped. You think I'm leverage. I think you're a target, he corrected, then quieter, and I won't lose either of you. Later, after Marco slept and the compound settled into uneasy quiet, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. Andrea stood in the doorway, watching, not intruding. You should rest, he said. I will. He didn't move. Finally, I looked up at him. You believe me now? Yes. And what happens when this war ends? His gaze didn't waver. It won't, he said simply. But you won't be alone in it anymore. He closed the door behind him, leaving me with the truth echoing in my chest. I didn't just save his son. I lit the fuse to a war, and Andrea Marcorelli was done pretending he wasn't built to burn the world for the people he loved. They moved us before sunrise. No warning. 1 minute I was asleep beside Marco, and the next I woke to the sound of keys turning in the lock. The door creaked open, and Andrea's voice followed, low, clipped, cold. Get dressed. Bring the baby. I didn't argue, didn't ask where we were going, because something in his tone told me asking wouldn't change a damn thing. The new wing was deeper in the estate. Less marble, more steel, fewer windows, thicker walls. A place built to keep the outside world from ever reaching us again. Or maybe to keep us from leaving. The room was nicer somehow, warmer, still sterile in its perfection, but the crib had fresh blankets. The shelves had children's books. A rocking chair waited by the corner with a soft gray blanket folded over the back like someone had prepared it for me. But I hadn't asked for this. None of it. Why move us? I asked. Andrea leaned against the doorframe, sleeves rolled, tie undone like he hadn't slept. He probably hadn't. I don't trust the perimeter, I arched a brow. You trust this wing more than your own guards? I trust concrete, he replied, and I trust myself. I turned back toward the crib, brushing my fingers gently over Marco's head as he slept. He's okay. I know. His voice was closer now. I didn't turn. I know, I repeated, but I need to say it out loud. A pause, then quieter. So do I. I finally faced him. You said they'll try again. They will. And me? He held my gaze. They'll use you, or they'll destroy you. My heart stuttered. So you're locking me away? I'm protecting what's mine. Hey, before I tell you what he did next, are you still with me? Because this is where it stops being a story and starts being a trap. Now let's get back to my downfall. I stiffened. What do you mean? What's yours? He didn't flinch, Marco. And me? He stepped forward. You gave up everything to protect my son. You knew what taking him meant, what it would cost you. That doesn't mean I belong to you. I didn't say you belong to me. His voice dropped. I said you're mine. There's a difference. A terrifying one. Because Andrea didn't take ownership like a man. He claimed like a king. I didn't respond. Not with words, but something cracked inside me then. Something brittle I'd been clinging to like a raft. Distance. Safety. The illusion that I could stay here and not drown in him. I turned away, heart pounding, palms sweaty, heat crawling up my neck. He didn't follow. Just stood there watching me in silence until I said the one thing I shouldn't have. I used to dream about what his father would be like. The words slipped out like a confession. Soft. Barely audible. Andrea didn't speak. I kept going. I imagined kind eyes, a gentle voice, a man who would sing lullabies and cry at first steps. I looked at him. You're not that man. No, he said. I'm not. He stepped closer and closer until his voice brushed the shell of my ear. But I'm the man who'll make sure no one ever gets close enough to hurt him again. His hand came to rest on the crib rail. Marco stirred, tiny fingers flexing in sleep. Andrea's eyes dropped to him, then back to me. You did what no one else in my world could do, he said. You saved him. His voice dropped lower. And I will kill anyone who tries to take either of you from me again. He left before I could respond, and I hated how part of me wanted him to stay. That night, I found myself in the rocking chair, Marco curled against my chest, the soft creak of wood beneath us the only sound in the room. Andrea hadn't come back, not once. And still, I felt him in the walls, in the quiet, in the way the guards outside didn't look me in the eye when I passed, because something had shifted. And I didn't know if I'd survive the storm or become part of it. The next morning, a dress appeared in the wardrobe, soft gray silk, modest but elegant. It fit perfectly, which told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't just moved me. He was preparing something, claiming me louder. Lunch was waiting when I entered the garden, small, secluded, walled off by hedges high enough to block snipers. Andrea sat at the table already, reading something. He didn't look up as I approached, but his voice found me anyway. You wore it. I didn't want to insult the tailor, I said flatly. He looked up then, a ghost of something dangerous curling at the edge of his mouth. Liar. I sat. Carefully, he poured my tea. Like this was normal, like we hadn't been hunted 2 nights ago, like I wasn't still trying to figure out whether I was prisoner or something worse. I'm not sure what this is, I admitted quietly. He lifted his eyes. What? This. This. I gestured around. Us, the crib, the garden, silk dresses and breakfast like we're... I stopped myself. He didn't. Like we're a family? I looked away. He didn't press, didn't mock, just said the words that haunted me all night. You're safe here. For how long? As long as you stay. The words should have made me feel protected. They didn't. They made me feel owned. I miss my name, I whispered. He stilled. Elise Carter doesn't exist, but Erica Thomas does, and she hasn't been allowed to exist since I ran. His expression shifted, softer. I remember your voice, he said. That night, you were the only one who stayed calm. I blinked. What? When she crashed, his jaw tensed. When my wife died, I was shouting, cursing, threatening the whole damn hospital. But you didn't panic. He looked at me, something almost reverent in his gaze. You held her hand. You told her he'd be okay. I swallowed hard. You remember that? I remember everything. He leaned back, gaze heavy. And I never forgot you. My heart twisted. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream. But the truth? I didn't feel like a prisoner anymore. I felt like a match, and he was holding me too close to the flame. The rain started sometime after midnight, soft at first, then heavier, until it battered the windows with the kind of rhythm that makes you stop breathing just to hear it better. I couldn't sleep. Not with the weight of everything pressing down on me. The baby monitor whispered Marco's steady breathing from the nightstand beside me, the green light glowing soft and safe. My son was fine, but I wasn't. I slipped out of bed barefoot, pulled Andrea's oversized sweater tighter around me, and opened the bedroom door. The guards looked up, then stepped aside without a word. They didn't ask where I was going. They already knew. His office door was open. He sat behind the desk in a black shirt, sleeves rolled, collar undone. His tie hung from the edge of the lamp like he'd given up halfway through pretending to be civilized. There was whiskey in his glass, and grief in his eyes. He didn't flinch when he saw me. Didn't ask why I was there. He just nodded once as if he'd been waiting. "You still don't sleep," I said softly, stepping inside. He didn't smile, didn't lie. "I don't dream," he said. "So what's the point?" I walked to the bookshelves, slow, deliberate, not to look, just to breathe. I felt his eyes track me the whole way. "Does it ever stop hurting?" I whispered. No. The honesty cracked something in me, not because I didn't expect it, but because I did. "I used to think grief was something you survived," I said, "but I was wrong." He watched me. "It doesn't end," I continued. "It just finds new places to live inside you." His chair scraped quietly as he stood, and suddenly he was right behind me, close, but not touching. His voice brushed my neck. "Where does yours live?" I closed my eyes. In the moments I let myself hope. I turned to face him, and I shouldn't have, because the look in his eyes, possessive, tormented, hungry, wasn't the kind you walked away from. "You shouldn't look at me like that," I said. "I told you once," he murmured. "I don't hate you." "But you should. Maybe." His fingers brushed my cheek, and I didn't stop him. "I should be afraid of you," I breathed. "You are," he whispered back. And still I didn't move. The air between us fractured. Everything that had been building, grief, guilt, fury, obsession, it snapped. I reached for him at the same moment he pulled me in. His mouth crashed against mine, rough, unforgiving, desperate. It wasn't soft, it wasn't sweet. It was a collision, a demand. His hands cupped my face, slid into my hair, fisted like he didn't trust me to stay. My fingers clawed at his chest, gripping the fabric like I needed something to hold onto or I'd drown. He tasted like whiskey in winter and something darker, something his. When he backed me against the wall, I didn't flinch. When his hand found my waist and yanked me closer, I didn't stop him. And when he kissed me again, slower this time, but no less destructive, I opened to him, because I was already his. Maybe I always had been. I don't remember how we got to the couch, or when his shirt came undone, or when I stopped thinking. But I remember the way his hand cupped the back of my head, even as his mouth devoured mine. I remember the way his breath hitched when I said his name. I remember the sound he made when I kissed the scar just beneath his jaw. I remember the way he held me afterward. Like something fragile, like something wanted, like something he didn't know how to keep but couldn't let go of. We stayed like that for a long time, breathing, not speaking, until I finally whispered the truth into the silence between us. I never thought it would feel like this. His grip tightened around me. I never thought I'd feel again. I buried my face in his chest, because there was nothing else to do, because I couldn't take the way he was looking at me. Like I wasn't the nurse who ran, or the woman who stole his son, but the one who stayed. Eventually he moved, shifted just enough to look down at me. His voice was rough. Unsteady. "I want to hate you for what you did. I know, but every time I look at him," he swallowed, "every time I look at you." I lifted my eyes. "I don't," he said, and the words broke something open inside me, because they weren't a promise or an apology, but they were real. "I don't know what this is," I admitted, voice low, "or what it's supposed to be. I don't either. But I know I can't survive losing him." He cupped my face again. "You won't." My chest ached. "And you." He didn't hesitate. "If I lost either of you, I wouldn't survive it." We didn't sleep that night. We stayed wrapped around each other in the dark, breathing the same air, sharing the same silence. And when the sun finally rose, neither of us were the same. We had crossed a line. There was no going back now. I should have known the quiet wouldn't last. You don't lie with a man like Andrea Marcorelli and expect peace to follow. You expect fire, war, consequences. And by the third morning after he touched me like I wasn't his prisoner, I got exactly that. It started with a phone call. I heard it from the nursery. his voice slicing through the silence of the hall, sharp and foreign in a language I didn't speak, though I recognized the tone. Russian. Whatever was said, it made him curse under his breath. Then silence. Then the sound of glass shattering. By the time I stepped into the doorway, he was already moving, suit jacket slung over his shoulder, gun holstered, phone abandoned on the table. His eyes landed on me like a strike. They made it official. My stomach tightened. What did? They've put a price on his head. His voice was quiet, calm, deadly. Who? The Vescari, he said. They've allied with what's left of the Santori. I blinked. But that means it's not about control anymore. He looked toward Marco's crib. It's about extinction. Before I tell you what he did next, this is your warning. After this, nothing stays innocent. Now, let's get back to the moment it broke. It happened faster than I could process. Andrea ordered every external gate shut, called in men I hadn't seen before, ruthless, silent, tattooed with the kind of ink that only meant one thing. Death wasn't a consequence for them. It was a language. The house transformed overnight, not into a home, but a stronghold. The nursery was fortified, bomb-proofed. Bulletproof glass sealed the windows. A panic room was built into the walls, disguised behind a panel I wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't shown me. You lock him in here, Andrea said, voice low, pointing to the hidden compartment, and you don't come out until I find you. And what about you? I whispered. He didn't answer. Just brushed his knuckles down my jaw and walked out the door. The first hit came that night. A car bomb outside the eastern gate. No casualties. Just a message. They weren't looking to wound. They were promising war. Andrea didn't flinch. He met with his top lieutenants in the dining hall, maps and floor plans spread across the antique table like a general before battle. I watched from the corner, unseen, uninvited, until he looked up and said, "She stays." Someone, an older man with gray at his temples, cleared his throat. "Boss, with respect, she's not." "She stays?" Andrea repeated, colder this time. No one questioned him again. I didn't speak, just listened. To names I didn't know, territories I didn't recognize, plans that involved bloodshed like it was currency. And all of it, for the child asleep upstairs with one tiny fist curled against his cheek. "I didn't ask for this," I whispered that night. Andrea didn't look up from the papers he was signing. "You gave him a name," he said. "You gave him life. That means you're in it now." "And you?" He did look at me then. Slow, sharp. I was born in it. Later, when he finally lay beside me, his hand found my waist beneath the sheets, pulling me into the kind of silence that doesn't need words. I should have pulled away, but I didn't, because I knew what he was doing, holding me like an anchor, like the storm he was about to walk into would drag him under if he didn't. And God help me, I held him right back. The attack came just before dawn. Gunfire outside the west wall, then the screech of metal tearing, the house flooded with movement, guards shouting, radios crackling, Marco's cry echoing through the monitor. I ran to him, heart in my throat. He was safe. Shaking, confused, but safe. I held him until Andrea burst through the door, gun still in hand, breathing hard. "You're okay?" he demanded. I nodded. Yes. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pressed his forehead to Marco's and whispered something I didn't understand. Then turned to me. "I need you downstairs." My stomach dropped. Why? "Because I want them to see you." I didn't ask who. I didn't have to. The man was dragged in, bloody, bruised, snarling in Italian tar I only half understood. "Vescari," someone said. Andrea stood before him, calm, composed, a king delivering judgment. "She risked her life to save my heir," Andrea said, nodding to me, "and you aimed a gun at her door." The man spat blood. "She's no one." "No," Andrea said quietly, "she's mine." He raised the gun. I flinched, but Andrea didn't pull the trigger. He handed the weapon to me. My hands shook as I took it. "What? What are you doing?" I whispered. "You decide," he said. "You saved my son. You have the right to end the man who tried to take him." The man laughed, coughed blood. "You don't have it in you," he sneered. He was right. I didn't, but Andrea stepped close, his hand covering mine around the grip. "You don't have to," he murmured. "But you do need to see what happens to those who try." He pulled the trigger. I didn't even flinch. Later, I threw up in the garden, not because I hadn't seen death before, but because I'd never felt it so close. Andrea found me there, silent, still stained with someone else's blood. I didn't look at him. "Why did you make me watch?" "Because this is the world you're in now. I didn't choose it." You did, he said, the second you chose to run with him. I turned on him then, eyes burning, fists clenched. You want me to be like you? I snapped. Cold? Numb? Willing to kill just to prove a point? His expression didn't change, but his voice did. You think I want that for you? He said, quiet and razor sharp. You think I want you to be like me? I don't. Then what do you want? He stepped forward. His fingers brushed my wrist and his voice cracked. I want you alive. That night he didn't touch me. He sat in the chair beside the bed, watching the door like a sentry while I rocked Marco to sleep. He didn't sleep, didn't speak, but I knew what he was thinking because I was thinking it too. The war had begun, and there was no going back now. They came for him again, not through the gates, not with bombs or guns or threats etched into car doors. This time, they came through me. It happened in seconds. One blink, one breath, one heartbeat too slow. I was walking with Marco through the East Wing garden, walled, locked, guarded. Andrea had insisted it was the safest part of the estate during construction on the upper floor. 2 guards trailed us at a polite distance. Marco was laughing, clutching a blue toy car in his fist and babbling like he didn't know the world wanted to steal him. Then I turned the corner and saw the gardener. Except he wasn't. His hands were clean, his eyes were wrong. And the second I screamed, the world exploded. Gunshots, shouting, Marco crying. I ran, held him against me and ran through the hedges, thorns ripping my skin, my boots slipping in the mud. I didn't stop. Not when bullets split leaves beside my head. Not when someone shouted, take the mother. I kept running, because if they got me, they got him. The guard caught up first, fell beside me in a pool of blood after taking a bullet meant for Marco. I screamed. Another grabbed me, dragged me behind a stone column, while the firefight lit the garden like a storm made of flame. Marco was still screaming, so was I. I didn't see Andrea. Not until the world stilled and the last man hit the ground. He appeared like a shadow ripping through the mist, gun raised, expression carved from murder. When his eyes landed on me, everything in him cracked. He didn't speak, didn't ask. He just dropped to his knees in front of me and pulled Marco from my arms with shaking hands, checked his face, his limbs, ran his palms down the baby's body like he couldn't believe he was real. Then he looked at me, and his voice broke. You're bleeding. It was true. I hadn't noticed. Cuts on my arms, a graze on my cheek, my sweater torn. But I didn't care. I just whispered, we're okay, and watched his hands curl into fists around his son. He gave Marco to the guard behind him without a word, then stood and turned toward the bodies. One was still breathing, gasping, gurgling, crawling. Andrea walked to him, no rage, no noise, just cold purpose. He raised his gun and fired, once, twice, a third time, for silence. And when he turned back to me, his shirt was soaked in blood that wasn't his. He didn't speak until we were inside. He didn't even look at me until Marco was safe, fed, and asleep in a new room reinforced with enough steel to hold back a war. Then he found me in the shower. I was sitting on the floor, fully clothed, letting the hot water pound my back like it could erase what happened. He knelt beside me, silent. I didn't cry. Not until he touched my shoulder. Then I broke. He held me like I was glass, washed the dirt and blood from my skin with his bare hands, wrapped me in a towel and carried me to bed like I weighed nothing. I let him. Not because I was weak, but because I couldn't hold myself together anymore. And he didn't ask me to. We lay there in silence until I whispered the one thing I wasn't supposed to feel. I was scared. I know. I didn't care what they did to me, I breathed, but I couldn't if they'd hurt him. They didn't. But if they had, his voice cut through mine, low and final. They didn't. I turned my face into his chest. I've never been that afraid in my life. He didn't respond. Not with words, but his arms tightened around me until I breathed, like he was trying to anchor me to the earth. I thought he'd fall asleep beside me. But when I woke a few hours later, the bed was cold. The hall was empty, and the air tasted like something had broken. I found him in the basement. The blood still hadn't dried on his hands. 3 bodies lay on the floor in black bags, half unzipped. Santori symbols carved into their chests. Andrea was silent, just staring. Luca stood beside him. Boss, he said quietly, we traced the route. They paid off one of our supply drivers, slipped in through the greenhouse. Andrea's jaw clenched. Show me. Now? No, in 30 minutes. I'm going to hold my son first. When he walked past me, he paused, stopped, then looked down at his hands. I almost lost you. I swallowed hard. But you didn't. He met my eyes, and I saw something I wasn't ready for. Not love, not obsession, but something far more dangerous. Need. I killed 3 men today, he said softly. And I'd do it again. I'd do worse. I know. And if they'd touched you. His throat worked. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to, because I'd already seen what he became when the people he loved were threatened. I don't want to be the reason you become this, I whispered. You're not, he said. You're the reason I'm still only this. He stepped closer. His voice dropped. If anything ever happens to you, it won't. Don't say that. He touched my cheek. Blood still dried on his wrist. Because if it does, he whispered, I'll become something the world can't survive. We didn't touch that night, didn't kiss, didn't need to, because something far more intimate passed between us. The knowledge that we wouldn't survive losing each other. Not just him, me too. And I realized this wasn't just a war for an heir. This was a war for everything we had left, and if we didn't win, there'd be no one left to mourn us. The next morning he left a dress on the bed. Midnight blue, simple, elegant, lined with soft velvet, the kind that whispered across skin like a secret. I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I did. He was about to make a move, and he wanted the world to see me when he did. The house was too quiet, not tense, not dangerous, just quiet. Like something was about to shift and everyone knew it except me. Marco was already dressed when I entered the nursery. One of the women, Lucia, the only one Andrea trusted with him besides me, smiled gently and placed a kiss on his head. He's ready, she said. They're waiting. They? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I followed the guards down to the west wing, the part of the estate I hadn't seen yet. It wasn't marble and glass like the rest. This was darker, older, wood-paneled walls, deep rugs, family portraits that stared down at me like I was a stranger who didn't belong. And maybe I was. But I kept walking, because whatever Andrea was about to do, I needed to see it. The room was full when I arrived, men in tailored suits, weapons at their hips, women beside them, silent, polished, purposeful. Andrea stood at the head of the long table, shoulders squared, sleeves rolled, jaw set. He looked like a storm, and every person in that room knew it. When his eyes found me, the noise dimmed. No one spoke, no one moved. He didn't smile, didn't soften, but something in his gaze shifted, acknowledged me, pulled me in. Sit, he said. He didn't say beside me, he didn't say stay quiet. He said sit, like I belonged at his table. Like I had a voice in the kingdom he ruled with blood. I sat, every pair of eyes followed me. Some curious, some cautious, some resentful. I didn't care, because Marco was safe, Andrea was alive, and I had earned this seat. Even if I didn't know what it cost yet. I called you here, Andrea began, voice even, because this war is no longer a matter of territory. It's personal. Heads nodded, eyes sharpened. Andrea placed a photograph on the table, one I didn't recognize, then another, and another, names I'd never heard, faces I'd never seen. He looked up. This is who betrayed us, who funded the Santori, who marked my son for death. Silence, then murmurs, then a voice, older, Italian, skeptical. And the woman? Every eye turned to me. Andrea didn't hesitate. She stays. She's the mother, the man said, not the wife. That child is legitimate, yes, but her place is by my side, Andrea cut in, not loud, but final, like steel being sheathed. No one argued after that. When the meeting ended, the room emptied fast, except for him and me. We stood in the silence until he crossed the distance between us. You didn't run. I looked up at him. Was I supposed to? He studied me, then softly, most would have. Then I'm not most. No, he said, you're not. We walked in silence to the upstairs balcony. The sky was gray, thick with the promise of more rain. Below us, men loaded crates into trucks, weapons, supplies, bodies maybe. I didn't ask. Andrea stood beside me, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the horizon like he was already preparing for the next battle. You've changed, he said suddenly. I'm surviving. He glanced at me. No, you're leading. That word landed hard. I'm not leading anything, I said. This isn't my empire. It could be. I shook my head. I'm not a queen. He turned to me, stepped in close. No, he murmured. You're something worse. My breath caught. Worse? You make kings bleed. He leaned in, not to kiss me, just to speak. Soft, dark, intentional. I've ruled this world without love, without softness, without anything I couldn't afford to lose. His hand brushed mine, and then you walked in. A stranger. A thief. I'm not sorry, I whispered. Good. His eyes locked on mine. Because I'm not letting you go. We didn't kiss. Not then. Not there. But I felt the promise of it burning between us. And it terrified me. Because I wasn't sure I could survive him. But I was even less sure I could survive without him. That night, he offered me something I didn't expect. Not power. Not protection. Freedom. He stood in my doorway after Marco had fallen asleep. Silent. Hands at his sides. I need you to know something, he said. I sat up. What? You can leave. The words knocked the air from my chest. What? If you walk out those doors, he continued, you'll be safe. I'll make sure of it. No one will follow. No one will question. I'll move heaven and hell to protect you. But, he stepped closer, you stay because you choose me, not because I kept you. I stared at him, stunned, then whispered, why now? Because if you choose to stay, he said, voice low, I need to know it's real. I stood, crossed the room, placed my hand over his heart, felt it racing beneath my palm. I haven't run yet, I said. His hand covered mine. I know. And I'm tired of surviving. His voice cracked. Then stay. I nodded. I will. He didn't smile, didn't move, just leaned in and kissed my forehead like a promise. And for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't a thief, or a fugitive, or a nurse who made a terrible mistake. I felt like I was someone worth choosing. The morning was quiet. For once, not the kind of quiet that felt like a warning, but real quiet, peaceful. Like the house had finally taken a breath and decided to keep it. Marco was asleep in the sunlight, curled on a blanket in the garden, a half-chewed teething ring resting by his shoulder. I sat a few feet away, watching his chest rise and fall, my fingers tangled in the grass beneath me, like it might hold me here longer if I clung tight enough. Andrea stood at the window above, watching us. I didn't have to look to know. He watched like that every day now. Less like a man guarding his territory. More like someone afraid to blink in case the dream slipped through his hands. When he finally came outside, he didn't speak. Just walked to me. Sat down beside me in his slacks and dress shoes like he had nowhere else to be. Like being here, with us, was the only thing that mattered anymore. And maybe it was. I thought the house would feel different after all this, I said quietly. He looked at me. How? Louder, angrier, hollow. He didn't answer, just reached for my hand and held it against his thigh, warm and strong. It's never felt like this, he said. Like what? Like home. I looked at him. The monster I ran from, the father I never meant to steal from, the man who should have hated me, and instead chose me, over revenge, over war, over pride. He chose us. You could have let me go, I whispered. I could have. You gave me the choice. Yes, I turned toward him. Then here's mine. His brow lifted. I'm not leaving. His fingers tightened around mine. I know. We didn't say I love you. We didn't need to. That wasn't how this worked, not between us. Not after everything. We chose each other in blood, in silence, in war. That was stronger than any vow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, slipped it into my hand. What is this? Proof. I opened it. My name, Marco's name, his. All tied together, on paper, in ink, in law. You're not a secret anymore, he said. Not to me. Not to them. Tears stung my eyes. I blinked them away. You did this without asking. You would have said no. You don't know that. I know you, he said. You don't need crowns or contracts. He touched my cheek. But I need the world to know who you are. We sat in silence for a while, listening to Marco's soft breathing, to birds somewhere in the trees, to the kind of stillness that only comes after the storm finally breaks. And then he said the words I didn't realize I'd been waiting for. You're his mother, but you're more than that. I turned toward him. I want you beside me. You already have me. He shook his head. I want the world to see it. I should have felt fear, but I didn't. Not anymore, because I had already stood in the fire and survived. Because he had already shown me the kind of loyalty people bleed for. Because this was no longer about a child I saved in the dark. This was about us, a family carved from ruin, a king who never stepped down, and a woman who never asked him to. That night, he didn't take me to bed like a man claiming his prize. He undressed me slowly, tasted every scar, held me through every breath, whispered thank you against my skin like a man who finally understood what love could cost, and chose it anyway. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, Marco asleep in the next room, the future stretching ahead of us like something we could finally shape, Not through force, not through fear, but through choice. He looked at me, eyes soft in the dark. "What happens now?" I asked. He smiled. "The real kind. The world bends," he said, "or it breaks. And us?" He leaned in, brushed his mouth over mine. "We bend it." The next morning I stood at the balcony with Marco in my arms and watched Andrea address the men outside. No blood, no threat, just presence. He didn't need to scream, didn't need to command. He was the command. And when he reached for my hand before stepping down to them, the message was clear. This is the woman who saved my son. This is the woman who stayed. This is the woman I chose. Some of them nodded, some didn't, but none of them looked away. Because they understood what it meant when a man like Andrea Marcorelli stepped into the light and brought someone with him. He wasn't hiding anymore. Neither were we. Later that night, I found him in the nursery, rocking Marco, humming something soft and low. He looked up when I entered. "He's getting heavier," he murmured. "He's growing." Andrea nodded, then looked down at the child in his arms. "Our son." The words hit me harder than I expected, not because they weren't true, but because I'd been holding them alone for so long, I forgot what it would feel like to finally hear them from him. "Our son," I repeated, softer. He stood, placed Marco gently in the crib, then turned to me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and said the thing I would never forget. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." And I believed him, because monsters don't get happy endings. But men who choose to fight for them, they do. And I had one. In this house, in his arms, in our son's sleepy smile, we were never meant to be safe. We were made to survive, to protect, to fight. But for once we weren't doing it alone. We were doing it together. And that was everything. He was never supposed to choose me. I was never supposed to stay. But in the end, the devil didn't take my soul. He gave me his name. If you felt that, if it pulled you under, Book 2 is waiting. What happens next will leave you pissed, and he'll burn the world. Subscribe now and hit that notification button. You don't want to miss what's next. Thank you for listening. See you in the next book, where my story take a major turn that will test me to my limits. She gave birth with chains around her wrists. No doctor, no mercy, just enemies watching as her body broke. And still, she lived. Now he'll burn the world to make sure no one ever touches her again. This is Book 2 of the Devil's Heir trilogy, The Heir They Tried to End. If you're just joining us, welcome to the fire. However, you need to go back to Book 1 to see how it all started. Let's begin. The first time I saw fear in Andrea Marcorelli's eyes, it wasn't during war. Not even when I came home bleeding and bruised, carrying the child who was never supposed to exist. It was the day I started to show. He didn't say it. He didn't need to. The way his eyes stayed on my belly like he was counting heartbeats, the way he shadowed my every step, always too close, always too silent, the way he watched the doors, the windows, the sky, like he knew fate was sharpening its knife again. He didn't trust peace, and he didn't trust the world with me. "You're not sleeping," I said one night. He was standing by the bedroom window, shirtless, tense, his hand wrapped around a tumbler of something he hadn't touched. "Neither are you," he said quietly. I ran my hand over my stomach. The swell had come fast. My body had surrendered to it overnight, softening, stretching. I was still me, but I wasn't mine anymore. I was hers, ours, and I was terrified. But Andrea? Andrea was haunted. "She's strong," I whispered. "She better be." "She is." He turned toward me. His eyes were sharp, distant, wounded in a way that felt too old to be from now. "This is different," he said. I nodded. He came to the bed, sat beside me, pressed his hand to my stomach, the way he always did before he spoke about her, like touching her was the only way he could believe she was real. "I can't lose you," he said. "You won't." I almost did, twice. He looked at me then, really looked. This time I wouldn't survive it. He had seen death, that he had delivered it. But nothing scared him like this child growing inside me. Not because she was weak, because he was. For her, he doubled the guards, tripled the surveillance, made Luca audit the entire estate's protocols twice in 1 week, but none of it helped the sick feeling in his gut. Or mine. Because something was wrong. It started with the gate logs. An entry recorded, but no visitor. Lucia said it was a glitch. Andrea didn't believe in glitches. Then one of the perimeter guards quit without notice. No goodbye. No warning. Just gone. And then, this morning, the sonogram image was gone from the fridge. No one had touched it. No one would dare. And yet it wasn't there. You think someone was in the house? I asked, hand frozen mid-stir at the kitchen stove. Andrea didn't answer. He was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, gaze locked on me, like the air itself might try to cut me. I set the spoon down. Tell me. He walked forward, took my face in his hands. I will burn this city down before I let her be taken. My throat tightened. What about me? His jaw tensed. You are already mine. The world knows that. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone. But her, she's still just a promise. I won't let them take it. That night, when I curled around the baby bump and tried to sleep, he stayed awake again. I felt his hand on my hip, his breath behind my neck, his heartbeat, too fast, too strong, and I knew. This wasn't just fear, it was grief waiting to happen, and he was already bracing for it. The next day, I found our son in the library, curled on a cushion with a picture book, his toy car tucked under one arm. Marco looked up when he saw me, his whole face lighting like it always did. Mama? He ran to me, threw his little arms around my legs and pressed his cheek to my belly. Is she awake? I smiled. She might be. Tell her I said hi. I did. Then I picked him up and held him longer than I needed to, because I couldn't shake the thought that kept circling my brain like a vulture. If something happens to me, who will love him like I do? I told Andrea I needed air. He sent 2 guards with me. We walked the gardens behind the estate. Quiet, beautiful, blooming with spring. Marco chased butterflies, laughed at bees, asked me if the baby would cry when she came. I said yes. He said he'd protect her. And I believed him. Even if the world went to hell, I believed my 3-year-old son would die trying to protect his baby sister. Because love like ours doesn't care how small you are. It just fights. Andrea was waiting when we returned, not outside. Inside, in the shadows by the stairs. He didn't greet Marco, didn't greet me, just looked at the guards. You took the garden path? They nodded. Yes, boss. And the north cameras were functioning? One of them hesitated. Only for a second, but it was enough. Andrea stepped forward. I want every log from the past 24 hours reviewed. If 1 second is missing, burn it all. The guards disappeared. Marco held tighter to my hand. I bent down and kissed his curls. It's okay, baby, he whispered. Is Papa mad? I looked over his shoulder. Andrea's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack bone. No, I lied. Papa's just tired. That night, Andrea slept in the nursery. He took the couch by Marco's bed, a pistol within arm's reach. Not for Marco, for whoever might come. I watched them from the doorway. My son, my husband, claimed in every way but legal, and our unborn daughter. I had everything I never thought I'd have, and I was closer than ever to losing it. Because something had shifted in him. This wasn't the man who hunted me. This wasn't the man who once let his grief make him cruel. This was a man who'd been given something precious. Twice. And this time, he wasn't letting it go without a war. He doesn't know I'm not his mother by blood. Not really. Marco was only hours old when I ran with him, when I wrapped him in a hospital blanket, soaked in the blood of the woman who bore him, and whispered a promise I had no right to make. I'll keep you safe. I'll keep you mine. I won't let them do to you what they did to her. And somehow, I kept it. He's 3 now, all messy curls and bright, wide eyes, fiercely loyal, dangerously curious, always watching his father, always testing the edges of what he's allowed to do. And when he calls me Mama, he means it with every beat of his little heart. No hesitation, no confusion, no space between the woman who gave him life and the one who gave him everything else. This morning, he climbed into bed with me before dawn, curled under the covers with one hand on my stomach like he was guarding his sister himself. She's kicking, he whispered. I smiled through the fog of sleep. She knows you're there. She likes me best. Probably. Because I'm the big brother. That's a very important job. He nodded, serious. I won't let the bad guys get her. My throat tightened. Because I believed him. Because I also knew he shouldn't have to say it. Andrea walked in an hour later and found us still curled together. No guards, no locked doors, just sunlight, quiet, and peace, which meant he hated it instantly. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands behind his back, mouth a firm line. But his eyes, they flicked over Marco, then to my belly, and then to the window, like he was waiting for it to shatter. Come here, Papa, Marco chirped. Andrea didn't move, not until I sat up, pressed my hand to the mattress, gave him the smallest nod, then he came. And when he knelt on the edge of the bed, Marco lunged into his arms without a second thought. "I heard her kicking," Marco said proudly. "She's ready to come out." Andrea's hand found my belly, but it was Marco he looked at. "Not yet," he murmured. "She's not safe enough yet." Marco frowned. "We're safe." Andrea smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know." After breakfast, Andrea left to handle something urgent, which meant someone had either moved against us, or he thought they might. He never said details out loud anymore. Not when I was in earshot, not when Marco could hear, but I knew the signs. The way Luca lingered at the doorway, eyes sharper than usual. The way Andrea whispered in Italian, low, fast, tense. The way my name came last. Marco tugged my hand once Andrea was gone. "Can we go to the playroom?" I nodded. And we walked together through the quiet hallways, flanked by guards, watched by cameras, surrounded by luxury we both ignored. The playroom used to belong to Andrea's late wife. I could still feel her fingerprints on the bookshelves. The hand-painted mural of a lion and a lamb. The delicate little ballerina mobile tucked in a far corner, still spinning when the air moved just right. She never got to use this room. But Marco did. And now, so would her daughter. He ran to his train set, started muttering a story under his breath about Papa the Dragon and Mama the Fire Queen. I sat on the chaise, watched him play, pressed my hand to the rhythmic kicks rolling under my ribs, and tried to breathe. I knew something was coming. Even if Andrea hadn't said it, even if the guards hadn't doubled, even if the night patrols hadn't started circling wider, I could feel it. The silence was too heavy. The piece too clean, like a stage perfectly set, just waiting for the first drop of blood. Marco turned to me after 20 minutes. "Can I show her the book?" I blinked. "What book?" He ran to the little basket by the shelf, pulled out a battered, dog-eared picture book with a torn spine and crayons scribbled across the cover. "This one!" It was the first book I ever read to him. The night we went on the run, the night I held him in a motel bathtub and whispered, "You're gonna live, you hear me?" He toddled back and climbed beside me, propped the book on my belly, and began to read. His voice stumbled over the words, but I didn't care. He pointed to every picture, named every animal, gave every voice a new accent, half of them terrible impressions of Andrea. And when the book was over, he kissed my belly and whispered, "Don't be scared. I already love you." I turned my face so he wouldn't see the tears, because how do you explain to a child that love doesn't stop bad things? That sometimes the world takes what you love just to see if it can break you? That monsters don't care about bedtime stories or baby kicks or brave big brothers? They care about blood. And Andrea's family had spilled too much of it. "Do you miss Nana?" Marco asked suddenly. I froze. He didn't ask about her often. Andrea's late wife, his birth mother, the woman whose death carved a hole in this family deep enough for me to fall through. I didn't know what to say. So I told the truth. I didn't know her. "But she was my mama before?" I nodded. "Yes, but now you are." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I chose to be." He smiled, and for a moment it felt like enough. Later that night I asked Andrea if he'd visited the grave again. He didn't answer right away, just poured himself a drink, took a slow sip, looked out the window into the dark. "You're not a replacement," he said finally. "I know, but she died giving me a child." I nodded. "And now you carry mine." He turned, and I saw it there. Not fear, not guilt, not even grief, but rage, sharp, quiet, cold. "They won't touch you, even if they try?" He stepped closer and kissed my stomach like a vow. "They can try." I didn't hear his name the first time. It slipped past me like a draft under a door, too quiet to catch, too wrong to understand. Andrea was in the study with Luca. The door cracked just enough for sound to bleed into the hall. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was walking past, carrying a glass of water, trying to ignore the ache in my lower back and the way my daughter shifted restlessly inside me like she already knew something was wrong. I heard my own name first, then Marco's. Then Andrea said a word he never said lightly. "Impossible." I stopped. The glass trembled in my hand. When Luca spoke again, his voice was lower. "Careful, the way men talk when they're afraid of waking something old." "We confirmed it twice," he said. "He was reported dead after the purge. No body, no funeral. He disappeared across the border and took a new name." Andrea exhaled slowly. "Say it." There was a pause. Then Raffaele Santori. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the marble. Andrea was on his feet instantly. He didn't shout, didn't ask if I was hurt. He crossed the room and took my face in his hands like the world might fall apart if he didn't hold it together himself. "Are you bleeding?" "No," I whispered. "Just startled." He searched my eyes anyway. Then he looked past me, to the hallway, the cameras, the air. "Luca," he said quietly, "get out." The door shut, locked, and suddenly it was just us. "You know that name," he said. I nodded. Of course I did. Raffaele Santori. The cousin no one talked about. The shadow that lingered at the edge of every story about the rival family. The one who'd vanished before the bloodbath, before Andrea finished what the Santoris started. The one presumed dead because it was easier than admitting someone survived. "They said he was gone," I murmured. "They were wrong." My stomach tightened. "He hates you," I said. Andrea's mouth curved in a humorless smile. "He hates me because I lived." "And me?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to my belly, then back to my face. "He hates you because you stole the heir once," he said. "And now you carry the last thing that matters." I sat down slowly. My legs felt unsteady, not weak, just aware of how much was inside me, how many lives depended on my body continuing to do its quiet, miraculous work. "What does he want?" I asked. Andrea didn't hesitate. "You." The word landed heavy. "And the baby," I whispered. "Yes." "Hold on, before I keep going. If this is your first time here, welcome. If it's not, then you already know nothing ever stays buried. Now, let me tell you what his name really meant." Raffaele Santori had been a ghost for years, a story whispered by men who didn't want Andrea to hear it, a cautionary tale about what happens when blood survives long enough to remember. "He believes I stole his future," Andrea said, pacing now, "that I took everything that should have been his. And he thinks I stole Marco," I added. Andrea stopped, turned to me. "You did," he said gently. I didn't flinch. "I know." "And he thinks this child," Andrea's voice tightened, "is the end of his line." I pressed my palm to my stomach. "She's not a thing," I said. "She's not a symbol." Andrea crossed back to me, knelt, rested his forehead against my belly like he needed to ground himself. "She is to him," he said quietly, "and that's what makes him dangerous." The next few days unfolded like a slow tightening, not a panic, a preparation. Andrea didn't announce anything. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cancel routines or pull Marco out of sight. He just sharpened the world. The guards changed shifts at irregular intervals. The cars rotated. Routes shifted without warning. Phones were checked. Cameras upgraded. And still, something slipped through. It was Lucia who noticed first. She brought me a folded piece of paper she'd found near the laundry entrance. No writing. No message. Just a pressed black feather. My heart sank. Because the Santoris used feathers. Always had. A symbol of unfinished business. Of blood that learned how to fly. Andrea burned it in the fireplace without a word. Then he ordered every inch of the compound swept. Again, they found nothing. Which was worse. That night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe. Andrea's arm was heavy around my waist. His hand rested over my belly, fingers splayed, possessive and reverent all at once. He whispered to her sometimes, in Italian. Short phrases, promises, tesoro, piccola mia, sei al sicuro, you're safe. I didn't believe it, not because I doubted him, but because safety had never been part of loving him. "Tell me the truth," I said into the dark. He didn't pretend not to hear. "If he comes for me," I continued, "what happens to Marco?" Andrea's arm tightened. "He disappears," he said. "He becomes a ghost. No name, no face, no trail. And me? You survive," he said, "or I burn the world until you do." I swallowed. "And her?" His hand pressed gently against my stomach. "She will live," he said, voice ironclad, "even if it costs me everything." The next morning, I watched Marco play in the garden. He was chasing a ball, laughing, shouting orders at guards like they were his personal army. I smiled. Then I noticed the man across the street. He wasn't close, not obvious, just standing too still, watching. When I blinked, he was gone. I told Andrea. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and said, "He's closer than I want him to be." That night, Luca confirmed it. Surveillance pings, burner phones, a safe house discovered 2 neighborhoods away, empty but warm, occupied recently. "Raffaele Santori is not hiding," Luca said. "He's circling." Andrea nodded once. "Good." I stared at him. "That's not good." "It is," he said. "It means he's confident." "And confident men make mistakes," I finished. Andrea looked at me then. Really looked. You always did understand monsters. I didn't correct him. Because I wasn't watching Raffaele Santori like prey. I was watching him like a mother. And mothers don't hunt to win. They hunt to end threats. That night, I pressed my palm to my belly and whispered to my daughter, "There's a man who thinks you shouldn't exist." She kicked hard in response. I smiled through the fear. "Too bad," I whispered back, "because you're already stronger than him." It was supposed to be simple. A visit to the pediatrician's office for Marco, a short stop at the charity center to drop off donated supplies, maybe a coffee on the way back. 2 hours, 5 guards, 3 vehicles, standard protocol. Except I changed the route, because I was tired of being protected like a piece of glass. Tired of Andrea watching me like I might shatter at any second. Tired of the way everyone held their breath when I walked into a room. I wasn't dying. I was carrying life, and I needed to remember what freedom felt like, just for a little while. "I'll take the longer road," I told Matteo that morning. He hesitated. Andrea said, "I know what Andrea said." He shifted. "He won't like it. He never does." I smiled to soften the words, held Marco's hand tighter, watched my son swing his toy sword like he was defending an invisible princess. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't careless. I was brave. That was the difference, I told myself. Brave enough to breathe. Brave enough to believe I was more than the fear in my husband's eyes. We left the compound just after 9. The sun was bright, the city alive. Marco sang the whole way to the clinic, loud and off-key, turning the back seat into a concert hall. My hand never left my belly. She'd been quiet that morning. No kicks, no flutters, just a soft weight under my ribs like she was saving her strength. I whispered to her anyway. "We're okay," I said. Papa would have sent a damn army if he didn't trust the team. I didn't realize then, he had. But someone inside the army didn't belong. We made it to the doctor. Marco got a sticker for being so brave about his shots. I got 2 sets of smiles from nurses who didn't know my name but recognized the guards. We walked out of the clinic at 10:07. At 10:12, the reroute started. "I'm going to the center," I told Matteo as we reached the main road. He glanced at his phone. "That's not on today's plan." "It is now." Boss said no detours. I turned to face him fully. "I built that charity wing. I trained every volunteer there. I started it before Andrea ever knew my name." He didn't move. "Do you want to call him?" I asked softly. Because he wouldn't. Because he was loyal, but not that brave. Matteo swallowed. "I'll adjust the route." 10 minutes later, I realized something was off. Not loud. Not obvious. Just off. Too much silence on the radio. A black SUV idling too long at the corner. A woman in sunglasses standing still for no reason, holding a newspaper upside down. Pregnancy sharpens your instincts. Or maybe survival does. Either way, my stomach dropped before the gunshot ever came. The driver's side window shattered first. Glass exploded across the front seat. Marco screamed. I lunged sideways, shielding him with my body as the second shot cracked the side mirror. Matteo yelled something. The tires squealed. Doors opened. Guards spilled out. Bullets snapped against metal. My hand went to my belly before I even realized I was bleeding. Not deep, just a slice across my arm from the glass. But still, blood. Matteo grabbed the car door, dragging me out. "We have to move." "Marco. He's with Paolo. Go." I ran. Pregnancy slowed me. Adrenaline didn't care. We moved behind the SUV, crossed to the alley, more gunfire behind us, and then the second betrayal bullets, not knives. A voice, one I recognized, one that belonged to our side. "Drop the weapon," the man said, aiming at Matteo. Matteo froze. "What the?" The shot hit him in the leg. He collapsed. I screamed. Then ran. I didn't get far. Hands grabbed me. Too many, too strong. I kicked. Bit, fought. One slammed into my ribs. Another wrapped a cloth around my mouth. The smell hit instantly. Sweet, chemical, heavy. I choked. And the last thing I heard was Marco screaming my name. Still with me? Because this is the part I wish I could forget. This is the day I stopped being brave. And started being broken. Andrea got the call at 10:29 a.m. But it wasn't a call. It was a silence. One of his men reported a breach. Then the line cut out. Luca ran the tracker in under 15 seconds. 2 GPS pings gone. One flipped off manually. One jammed. Andrea didn't speak, didn't blink, just turned and walked toward the weapons room. He arrived at the scene less than 20 minutes later. Marco was in Paolo's arms, crying, safe but shaking. The SUV was riddled with bullets. 2 bodies on the ground. Matteo unconscious, bleeding out, but alive. No sign of me. No sign of the baby. No ransom note, no message, just blood. Andrea stood in the middle of it all and said nothing. Luca approached slowly. They took her, he said. Andrea looked down at the pavement, at a smear of red too dark to be mine. Then he turned to Luca. I want every camera in the city pulled, every black market dock watched, every burner phone traced. He glanced at Marco, who was still sobbing into Paolo's neck. His voice dropped. Send him away. Where? Somewhere no one knows. Not even me. Luca hesitated. What do I tell him? Andrea's jaw clenched. Tell him his sister needs him to be brave. The city held its breath for the rest of the day. Andrea didn't issue threats. He didn't call in allies. He didn't wait for demands. He just disappeared into the dark and began preparing to end whatever world had dared to touch me again. I woke up choking on plastic, not suffocating, controlled. A hood, loose enough to breathe, tight enough to remind me I wasn't meant to see. My wrists burned, not from rope, from cuffs, metal biting into bone with every jolt of the vehicle beneath me. I tried to move. Pain answered. Low. Sharp. Everywhere. Pregnancy didn't dull it. It sharpened it. Turned every sensation into something bright and merciless. I forced myself to breathe anyway, in, out, for her. Someone spoke near my ear. Not loud, not cruel, just efficient. Easy, a man said. You fight, you bleed, the baby screams, you don't want that. I froze. My body went still instinctively, like an animal realizing resistance would cost more than compliance. I swallowed. Where is my son? I rasped. Silence, then, not our target. Relief hit so hard my vision swam. My head lolled back against the seat as the car turned again. Faster now, tires humming, engine steady. This wasn't a grab and run. This was planned. Time slipped. Minutes? Hours? The drug in my system kept me conscious but heavy, like I was moving through water. I counted breaths, counted heartbeats, pressed my knees together whenever the road dipped, instinct screaming to protect the life inside me. I didn't cry. I wouldn't give them that. When the vehicle finally stopped, hands dragged me out. Cold air slapped my face. The hood came off. I blinked hard. Concrete, fluorescent lights, a warehouse or something dressed up to look like one. Too clean, too deliberate. A man stood in front of me, tall, dark hair cut short, smile too calm. I was beginning to worry, he said. You fought harder than expected. I stared at him. You're Santori. He inclined his head. Raffaele. The name tasted like ash. You're supposed to be dead. So they said. They strapped me to a chair, not cruelly, carefully. Straps across my chest, my thighs, my ankles. Enough to hold, not enough to bruise. Raffaele circled me like I was a piece of art he'd finally reclaimed. You know what I admire most? He asked. You didn't scream when you saw me. I'm pregnant, I said flatly. Not stupid. He smiled. Good. He crouched, brought his face level with mine. I told them to take you alive. My stomach twisted. And the baby? I asked. Oh, especially the baby. The door behind him opened. Another man stepped in. Older. Nervous. The perimeter's clean, he said. No tails. Raffaele stood. Good. Then we're ahead of him. My chest tightened. Ahead of Andrea. Andrea arrived at the site 13 minutes after they left. 13 minutes. That's how close he was. Close enough to smell the gunpowder still clinging to the air. Close enough to hear Marco's sobs echoing in his skull long after the sound had stopped. Close enough to see the blood on the pavement and know, no, it wasn't enough to be mine. He didn't ask questions. He didn't kneel. He stood in the middle of the street and let the silence speak. Then he said quietly, "This is not ransom." Luca nodded. No calls, no demands. Andrea's eyes went dark. They didn't take her for money, he said. They took her for blood. Back in the warehouse, Raffaele leaned against a table and watched me breathe. You see, he said conversationally, killing you would be simple, effective, but simple things don't last. I said nothing. I focused on her, on the steady pressure under my ribs, on the fact that she was still moving. You stole my family once. He continued. You ran with the air and humiliated us, and then you stayed. You built a life in his house. His voice sharpened. And now you carry the last thing that matters. I didn't steal him, I said. I saved him. Raffaele laughed. A real laugh. Warm, wrong. Everyone tells themselves that. They left me alone after that. Lights on, door locked, no windows, time stretched thin. I shifted as much as the restraints allowed, tested the straps. Not weak, not loose. Designed to hold me through labor. That thought nearly broke me. I swallowed it down. Not yet. Hours later, maybe more, footsteps returned. Raffaele stood in the doorway, phone in hand. "He knows now," he said. "He's hiding the boy." "Good." My heart lifted at that. "Smart man." He smiled. "He always was. That's why this has to be done properly." "Then kill me," I said. "Get it over with." Raffaele shook his head slowly. "No, death is a release." He stepped closer. "You're going to give him something to remember." Andrea didn't sleep that night. He didn't eat. He moved Marco before dawn. No lights, no convoy, no trail, just a car, a trusted man, and a location even Luca didn't know. Then he came back and closed the door. And the city learned what it meant when Andrea Marcorelli stopped pretending he was civilized. He cut off talks, burned bridges, activated names that hadn't been spoken in years. By nightfall, 3 Santori-connected businesses were ash. Still no call. Still no demand. Andrea welcomed the silence. In the warehouse, pain bloomed low in my back. Not labor. Not yet. Just my body reminding me it was under strain. I breathed through it. Counted again. In. Out. For her. Raffaele returned once more before dawn. He stood very still this time, almost respectful. "You know," he said, "my mother died screaming. Childbirth. No doctors. No mercy." My blood ran cold. "That's history," he continued. "I prefer symmetry." I met his gaze. "You won't break me." He smiled thinly. "I don't need to." He turned and left. The door shut. Locked. And in the silence, with metal biting into my skin and fear pressing down like a weight, I whispered the only truth that mattered. He's coming. Because Andrea Marcorelli did not negotiate. He annihilated. The world didn't shake when she was taken, it didn't burn. Not at first. At first, it just went quiet. And that was how I knew. Because Andrea Marcorelli doesn't rage like other men, he doesn't scream, doesn't beg, he doesn't cry in doorways or collapse to his knees in a spotlight of grief. He just stops pretending to be human and becomes the thing the underworld tells stories about. He shut down the estate within an hour. No one in, no one out. He sent Marco deeper underground than anyone thought possible. Not to friends, not to family, to ghosts, to men who owed him blood from the old days, when power wasn't polished and political. It was soaked in dirt, in smoke, in flesh. He burned their real names. "Marco no longer exists," he said to Luca. "Not until she's home." I didn't see it happen. I only heard about it later, whispered by men who flinched when they said his name. The safe house in Palermo, raided and emptied. The Santori pipeline on the eastern border destroyed, bodies left in a silent row. The diplomatic line from Milan, cut. Andrea didn't ask for allies anymore. He reminded them they were already his. Luca found him in the basement that night. Weapons laid out like scripture. Guns. Knives. Ledgers of names blacked out and circled in red. "She's still alive," Luca said carefully. Andrea didn't look up. "She has to be," Luca continued. "She is." Andrea's voice was steel. Luca nodded. Then, quieter, "You said you'd never go back." Andrea finally looked at him. I lied. He activated men we hadn't seen since the last war. Men without fingerprints or homes. Loyal to no flag but his. They called him Il Diavolo again. The devil. And Andrea didn't correct them. At the warehouse, I woke to contractions. Not full labor, not yet, but warning signs. A pulse of pain, low and sharp, followed by a pressure that made me grit my teeth. The baby twisted. My breath caught. Not now. Please not now. Raffaele hadn't visited in hours, but I knew he was close. He wanted her born in this cage. Born in a war she hadn't asked for. Born screaming so he could say, "Andrea lost everything." I counted each wave of pain. They weren't regular yet, but they were coming. I shifted my weight to ease the ache. The restraints rubbed raw. Still no food. Still no doctor. Just water and silence and the sound of rats scurrying behind the walls. Andrea was 2 steps ahead. He found the man who smuggled the van across city lines. Didn't kill him. He let him live, long enough to talk. And when the name Raffaele Santori passed that traitor's lips, Andrea smiled. Just once. Then broke the man's fingers one by one. He moved fast after that. 3 hideouts burned, 4 corrupt officers exposed. A hacker team pulled every satellite feed from the surrounding 10 miles. And still no exact location. But the perimeter was shrinking. Every move Raffaele made cost him another inch of safety. Back in the cage, my body kept rebelling. I closed my eyes and whispered to her. "I need you to stay," I said. "Just a little longer." She shifted under my ribs, not scared, strong. And I realized, with a pain I didn't expect, that she was fighting with me. Not because she understood, but because she felt me, and I wasn't done yet. The door opened mid-contraction. I gritted my teeth, keeping still as the pressure burned hot across my abdomen. Raffaele stepped in. He saw it immediately. "You're early," he said. "Disappointed?" "No, pleased." He crouched in front of me again like we were old friends playing a long game. "She'll come here, in this place, in my hands." My voice was hoarse. "You won't touch her." His smile was slow, measured. "You don't get to choose." Andrea was 5 hours out when Luca gave him the update. One more sighting. A burned license plate matched on an old industrial dockyard. Cameras blacked out, the perfect graveyard for a child not yet born. Andrea loaded his weapons in silence. He strapped on the bulletproof vest with practiced hands, then looked up at Luca. "If I don't make it..." "You will." Andrea's jaw tensed. "If I don't," he repeated, "protect Marco and destroy every bloodline tied to his name." Luca didn't argue again. He just nodded and handed him one last knife. In the cage, the pain sharpened. This time I couldn't hide it. I gasped, my body clenched, my hands trembled. Raffaele tilted his head. "She's coming faster than expected." I glared at him. "If she dies," I said, voice shaking, "there will be no place on this earth safe enough to hide you." He smiled like I amused him. "No one will come." "Someone always comes," I whispered. Back at the estate, Lucia found a note slipped under the pantry door. It was a feather. Black. Pressed flat. Andrea had left one just like it in Raffaele's mother's casket years ago. A symbol of what was unfinished and what would come full circle. Andrea didn't take a team. Not this time. He wanted silence. Precision. Blood without witnesses. He drove himself, crossed the city like a shadow. And when he reached the docks, he parked without headlights, walked into the dark with only vengeance for light. In the cage, I screamed for the first time. Her foot kicked under my ribs hard enough to steal breath. My body was beginning the process whether I wanted it to or not. I sobbed once, then bit it down. I had to stay calm. Not for me. For her. Because she needed time. Because Andrea was coming. And if I broke now, I'd never see him again. Somewhere, on the far edge of the compound, I heard shouting. Doors slamming. Feet running. One man screamed, then silence, then another scream, cut short. I smiled through the pain. Because I knew that sound. I knew what it meant when the devil arrived without knocking. Andrea Marcorelli had come for his family, and he wasn't leaving until we were all whole again. I couldn't tell how long I'd been strapped down. Hours? A day? Pain had replaced time. Contractions flared like wildfire. Too early, too sharp. Not steady yet, not real labor. But close. Close enough to scare me, close enough that I had to fight not to scream, because if I looked too weak, they'd take her early. If I looked too strong, they'd punish me for it. So I stayed in between, not crying, not silent, just enduring, and waiting for the devil I'd chosen to love. The cage wasn't metal, not literal. It was a converted storage room with bolted doors and a single cot where I'd been strapped upright like a display. Raffaele said it was for circulation. He said it with a smile, like we were sharing a joke. He hadn't come back in hours, not since the last contraction made me bleed through the thin layer of fabric they left me with. But I wasn't alone. The camera in the corner clicked softly every 20 minutes, watching, recording, waiting. I wasn't scared of dying, not really. I was scared of her never hearing my voice, of never feeling my arms, of growing up in someone else's story, with someone else rewriting how she came into this world. I was scared of what would be taken from her. And Marco and Andrea. I whispered her name again. We hadn't spoken it out loud yet, Andrea and I. Not even once. Superstition, maybe. Or fear. Or something ancient that ran through the blood of men who ruled empires with rings and silence. But I had it, tucked behind my teeth like a prayer. And I whispered it now, just for her. The door clicked. I didn't look up right away. My body hurt too much, and I already knew who it was by the scent. Cheap cologne, expensive rage. Raffaele entered slowly, hands behind his back, like a teacher inspecting a disobedient student. "You're bleeding again," he said, voice soft. "I'm also still breathing," I murmured. "Sorry to disappoint," he chuckled, walked closer, then crouched in front of me. "She's coming," he said. "I know." "You won't survive it." I met his eyes, didn't blink. "I've survived worse than you." He stood, turned away like he was bored, then, casually, "Do you know what your child will be?" "Mine," he laughed. "No, she'll be a story." He paced slowly, deliberately. "They'll say she was born in a cage, born screaming, born to a mother who died in chains. She'll grow up knowing her father gave up his kingdom just to bury her safely." I kept my voice steady. Andrea will never give you that. He will, about Raffaele said, because soon he'll have no other choice. I didn't flinch when he left, but I let my head fall back against the wall, breathed in, breathed out. Pain rolled through me again, lower, meaner. My stomach tightened, hips locking up, spine burning. She shifted. A foot or elbow slid under my ribs. I whispered her name again, and I swore she kicked harder. Somewhere outside the room, a gunshot cracked through the silence. One, then two more. Muffled. Quick. Raffaele didn't return. Neither did anyone else, but I started to count, because I knew that pattern. Andrea never fired more than once per target. 2 meant warning, 3 meant confirmation, silence afterward meant clean kill. I waited, throat dry, muscles trembling, every part of me stretched tight around the ache of holding her in, but I waited, because I felt him getting closer. Not just Andrea. My Andrea. The man I met in a hospital room, the one who looked at me like I was the ghost of every woman he'd failed, the one who hated me for stealing his son, the one who kissed me like survival depended on it, the one who once whispered, "I am more monster than man, but I will never let them touch you." That man was coming, and he wasn't bringing mercy. Somewhere to my left I heard metal groan. A door kicked open, then silence. Then screaming. Not mine, not Marco's, theirs. Andrea moved like a shadow wrapped in vengeance. By the time Raffaele realized the outer guards weren't responding, Andrea was already inside the plaque compound. He didn't kick down the front door, he melted through the side. Luca was waiting outside in case backup was needed. Andrea said nothing to him. He just walked. 2 knives, 1 silenced pistol, no hesitation. He cleared 5 rooms in under 4 minutes, no survivors. By the time he reached the final hall, blood coated his sleeves. He found the last guard panicking, gun raised, hand shaking. Andrea didn't blink, didn't stop. The knife hit the man's neck before the trigger could pull. He fell without a sound. Inside the cage, I felt her drop. Not fully, but enough to know. My body was giving out. The next contraction hit so hard I cried out. And that was when the door opened. Andrea didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stood there, dark eyes locked on mine, chest heaving, covered in blood that wasn't his. He crossed the room in 3 strides. Hands gentle, movements exact. "I've got you," he said. My chin trembled. "She's coming. She's early. I don't care." He unbuckled every strap with terrifying calm, cradled me close as I sagged into him, then pressed his forehead to mine. "I told you," he whispered, voice breaking. "They'd never take you from me. We didn't leave right away. We couldn't." Another contraction rolled through me and I screamed into his shoulder. He swore, low, vicious in Italian. Then he slid his arms under my legs and lifted me like I weighed nothing. "She's crowning," I gasped. "I know." "We can't wait." "I'm not." He laid me on the cot, gently, reverently, like I was something holy, then looked down at me like he was already kneeling in prayer. "I need you to hold on," I nodded, not because I could, but because I had to. Outside the room, the compound burned. Luca entered 10 minutes later, back up behind him, faces pale at the bodies. But Andrea never looked away from me. Not once, not when I screamed, not when I bled, not even when I whispered our daughter's name as the world tried to end around us. I wanted to scream, not from pain, though it was there, rolling through me in waves that made the world blur, but from the truth. The cruel, jagged truth. We weren't safe yet. Andrea had found me. He'd killed to reach me. He held my hand as I bled through the sheets of a makeshift cot in a warehouse soaked with the scent of death. But my body didn't care that he was there. My body only cared that our daughter was coming, too fast, too soon, and that I had to survive. Because she wouldn't without me. Andrea knelt beside me, eyes never leaving my face. Every contraction hit like a freight train. I couldn't hide it anymore. The shaking, the sweat. The sounds I didn't recognize as my own. My knees trembled uncontrollably. My skin burned. I couldn't tell if I was breathing too fast or not at all. But his hand never left mine, and his voice never wavered. "You hold on," he said. "You hold on, and I will take care of the rest." Luca entered the room, eyes flicking across the bloody cot, the restraints on the floor, the bruises on my arms. "We need to move her," he said. "Andrea didn't look up. She can't be moved. I can arrange a doctor." No time. Andrea turned his head just enough to show his eyes. And Luca stopped speaking, because we all knew what he saw. Not panic, not desperation, but possession. Andrea wasn't leaving that room unless I walked out of it with him, alive and holding our child. The next contraction came with blood. Too much. I bit my tongue and felt iron flood my mouth. She was coming, but my body was warning me. This wasn't right. Something inside me was tearing apart too soon. Andrea saw it too. He took my face in both hands, wiped the sweat from my brow, and kissed my temple. "You're the strongest thing I've ever known," he said. "But if you pass out, if you give in now, they win." Tears slid down my cheeks. "I'm not ready." "You don't have to be," he whispered. "You just have to keep going." "You still with me?" "Because if you are, you already know this. Part doesn't end in softness. It ends in blood, in fury, in the unholy strength of a mother who refused to die." The next hour felt like a blur of pain stitched together by Andrea's voice. He never yelled, never panicked. He guided me through every contraction like he'd trained for this moment his whole life. I screamed until my throat went raw, felt my body split and burn, dragging our daughter closer to the world one breath at a time. And all the while, Andrea whispered her name, the name we never spoke. Until now, he said it like it was a command, a vow, a warning to the universe that she belonged to us and no one else. But I was bleeding too much. I knew it. He knew it. She was coming too fast and I was tearing from the inside out. A lesser man would have begged. Andrea didn't. He just took my face again, kissed my lips, and said, "Stay with me, Tesoro. Don't make me raise her without you." She came screaming, fists clenched, tiny body slick and red and fierce. Andrea caught her in his hands. Not a doctor, not a soldier, just a man in love with two girls the world tried to erase. He wrapped her in his shirt and pressed her to my chest. I sobbed because she was warm, alive, and mine. But the bleeding didn't stop. My body convulsed. Andrea's arms closed around me instantly. "Stay awake," he said. "I've got you." I fought to keep my eyes open. I wanted to hold her longer, to memorize the shape of her mouth, the smell of her skin, the sound of her soft, perfect cry. But everything was going dim. Andrea didn't hesitate. He handed her to Luca, who stood stunned, unsure if he should even touch her. "Wrap her up. Keep her warm. She makes a sound. You shoot anyone who breathes too loud." Luca nodded, took her, vanished. Andrea turned back to me, ripped open a medical kit I didn't even see him take from one of the guards. His hands moved fast, pressure on my abdomen, bandages, injections. He was losing me, and he knew it. "Don't you dare leave me," he growled, voice shaking now. "Not after everything." "I'm trying," I whispered. He pressed our foreheads together. "You don't get to die. Not now. Not when I still need you." I wanted to say I loved him, but my lips couldn't move, so I looked at him, and I hoped he saw it there, in my eyes, in the breath I was still fighting to take, in the fact that I stayed. They brought the doctor 20 minutes later, too late to deliver her, not too late to save me. Andrea refused to leave the room. He held my hand as they worked, threatened the doctor with a slow death if he so much as looked away from his task. I slipped in and out of consciousness, each time hearing Andrea's voice pulling me back. "You survived worse," he whispered. "You'll survive this." Hours passed. By the time I was stable, the sun had begun to rise. The warehouse was empty. The men who took me were gone. The cameras were broken. And Andrea, blood-soaked, bruised, exhausted, was still sitting beside me, our daughter in his arms. I reached out. He shifted her into my embrace. I held her skin to skin, and she didn't cry. She just blinked up at me with eyes too big for her face, eyes that matched her father's. Andrea ran a hand through my hair. His voice was hoarse. "You gave her life." "She gave me a reason to live," I whispered. He leaned in, kissed me softly, then again longer. And when he pulled back, I saw something I hadn't seen in days. Relief. And love. "I should name her," I said. "You already did. Say it." His throat worked, voice thick. Sophia Marcorelli, born in captivity, born in fire, born to a mother who bled without mercy, but never gave up. They waited until the bleeding stopped, until Sophia was cleaned and sleeping against my chest, until Andrea had wrapped one arm around both of us like the only thing anchoring him to the earth. Then the call came. Not to me, not even to Andrea, to Luca. On a secure line, encrypted and rotating, accessed only once every 7 days. Andrea was in the hallway with his back to the wall, knife still strapped to his hip, shirt still stained with my blood. Luca's voice was low, cautious. "It's him." Andrea didn't blink. "Put it through." Raffaele Santori didn't sound like a man who lost. He sounded like a man who still believed the rules hadn't changed. that we were still in the same game, that Andrea hadn't already buried half his men, that I hadn't just given birth in a cage and lived. His voice was calm, even friendly. "Tell Andrea I'm calling with terms." Luca said nothing, just passed the phone to the devil himself. Andrea didn't greet him, didn't ask how he got the number, just said 2 words, "You're breathing." Raffaele chuckled. "For now." Andrea waited. "You know," Raffaele said, "I expected her to die, at least bleed out. She was early, wasn't she?" Andrea didn't answer. "She's alive?" Raffaele asked casually. "The baby?" Andrea's voice was like ice cracking. "Say her name." A pause. Then, mock regretfully, "We never got that far." Andrea's jaw flexed. "Then you don't get to speak of her again." Raffaele's tone shifted. Slick. Calculated. "Well, if you want her to stay alive, you'll consider what I'm offering." Andrea's eyes darkened. He walked to the far end of the hallway, shoulders tight. "What do you want?" "My future back," Raffaele said. "The one you stole." Andrea laughed once, a sharp, cold sound. "You were born useless. I just made it official." Silence. "Then, here's the offer," Raffaele said, voice tightening. "Public surrender. You step down. You denounce the Marcorelli name. Call it corrupt. Call it cursed. Say you're done. Retire with your family to whatever countryside villa you prefer, and I won't touch them." Andrea's hand clenched around the phone. "You want me to erase myself. I want you to admit you were never strong enough to carry the crown. And if I say no, you won't say no," Raffaele said smoothly, "because if you do, the next time I come for them, I won't miss." I didn't hear all of the call, just enough. Andrea walked back into the room with fire in his eyes and silence in his mouth. He didn't speak until he was beside me again, stroking Sophia's tiny back with one fingertip. Then quietly, "He wants my legacy." I nodded. "He can't have it. He wants me to vanish, to leave the family, the power, the empire." "And if you do?" Andrea looked down at Sophia, then at me. "He still wins. It was never about money. It never had been. This was about the bloodline, about erasing the name that had survived too many wars, destroying the family he couldn't kill outright, and punishing the woman who carried it forward in her womb. Me." Andrea didn't take long to respond. He called Luca back an hour later. "Set the meat." "Boss, are you?" Andrea cut him off. "He wants a performance? I'll give him one." Luca's hesitation was barely audible. "And if it's a trap? Then we don't walk away," Andrea said. "We burn it down." I should have been scared, weakened, recovering, a mother with a newborn and a body stitched back together by adrenaline and willpower. But I wasn't scared. I was furious, because Raffaele wanted us erased, not just physically but historically. He wanted the world to forget we existed, to forget that I stole Andrea's son and raised him into a future, to forget that I carried Sophia through hell and bled for her without mercy. He wanted to silence the truth. So I did something Andrea didn't expect. I stood, still shaky, still sore, but upright. I put Sophia in his arms and looked him in the eyes. "I'm going with you." Andrea's jaw tightened. "No, I have to. You just gave birth, and I need him to see what he failed to kill." Andrea stared at me for a long moment, then looked down at our daughter. When he looked back up, something in his expression shifted. Approval, respect, a dark, obsessive pride. "You want to remind him?" "No," I said. "I want to haunt him." The meat was set in the ruins of an old Santori villa, bombed in the last war, left to decay. Symbolic. Andrea didn't bring an army. He brought me. He brought Sophia. And he wore his wedding ring for the first time in public. He never put it on before. Said he wasn't the kind of man who deserved symbols of devotion. But that day he made sure the cameras caught it. Raffaele arrived with a full security team, 5 cars, 8 guards. No family, because he had none left. He looked at us like we were ghosts, like he couldn't believe we'd survived. Andrea stepped forward first. "Surrender?" he called across the empty courtyard. "Here I am." Raffaele smiled slowly. Well, the devil brings his bride and heir to the altar." Andrea didn't flinch. He just turned, took my hand, and pulled me forward, then unwrapped Sophia's blanket so Raffaele could see her. Tiny, warm, sleeping, alive. "Say her name," Andrea said again. Raffaele stared, nothing. Andrea smiled. I didn't think so. Then he pulled a folded sheet of paper from his jacket, tossed it at Raffaele's feet. It was the original Santori surrender, signed by Raffaele's father 20 years ago when the Marcorelli family took their crown. "Legacy matters," Andrea said. "Bloodlines matter." He glanced at me, then at Sophia. "We don't run from ours." Then he raised his gun and shot Raffaele's right-hand man in the head. One clean shot. Before any of the guards could draw their weapons, Luca stepped from the shadows with backup. Every Santori gun was suddenly outnumbered, trained, outflanked, surrounded. Andrea walked up to Raffaele slowly, gun lowered, words quiet. "You don't get to erase us," he said. "You don't get to rewrite history. You don't even get to die like a legend." He stepped closer. "So here's my offer. Live in exile. Alone. Forgotten. Powerless." Raffaele swallowed. Andrea's eyes burned, because death would make you a martyr. But obscurity? His voice dropped to a whisper. Obscurity kills everything. Then he turned his back and walked away. We didn't watch Raffaele fall apart. We didn't need to. He knew. He knew. He had failed. The daughter was born. The mother survived. The bloodline endured. And we had chosen each other again, not through peace, but through war. That night, Andrea lay beside me with Sophia curled on his chest. The moonlight touched the edge of his ring. His voice was soft. "He wanted me to give you up." I ran my fingers through his hair. "You didn't." "No," he said. "I never will." I never thought I'd return to the cage. But I did, not in chains this time, not bleeding or bound or screaming. I walked in on my own 2 feet, holding Sophia in one arm, a silent promise burning in my chest. The warehouse had been emptied, sterilized, erased. All signs of what happened here were gone. But I remembered. The screams, the pain, the moment I thought neither of us would survive. Andrea stood just behind me. He hadn't spoken since we arrived. He hadn't needed to. This was for me, not for vengeance, for memory, for reclamation. I turned to him. "Leave me here for a minute?" His jaw tightened. "No. Please." He looked at Sophia, now asleep against my heart, then at me. His expression didn't soften, but he stepped back, 1 foot outside the threshold, close enough to hear me breathe, far enough to give me space. I lowered myself onto the cot, the same one where my daughter had taken her first breath. I ran a hand across the worn fabric. And I whispered the truth. They didn't break me. They tried. God, they tried. But no one breaks a mother whose only goal is to live. Not escape. Not revenge. Just survival. Because survival means your baby survives too. Because defiance isn't a scream. It's a choice. I left the cage without crying. Not even once. Andrea didn't ask what I did in there. But later that night, I found a single camera from the original setup still powered on. Andrea had left it there, recording only me, only that moment, and he saved the footage like a confession. But the war wasn't over. Raffaele might have been humiliated, but he wasn't gone. We knew men like him didn't disappear quietly, so when Andrea said we were moving again deeper into the Sicilian countryside, I didn't argue. I packed Sophia's things. Marco was returned home. I hugged him tight, kissed his cheeks, and then held his hand tight, and walked away from our estate like it was just a chapter, not the ending. The new safe house was silent stone and shadowed windows, the kind of place where echoes had no names and ghosts didn't bother knocking. I liked it immediately. So did Andrea. It reminded us both of what mattered, not the walls, not the wealth, each other. But safety makes you forget how fast it can shatter. 3 weeks after Sophia's birth, I woke to silence. No crying, no footsteps, no breathing beside me. Andrea was gone. Sophia was gone. Panic flared before I even registered movement. Then the door opened, and Andrea stepped in with her, wrapped in his arms. "She wouldn't sleep," he said, voice rough with exhaustion. I reached for her, held her close, and something cracked open inside me. It wasn't weakness, it was rage, because I realized I'd started hoping we were safe again. And hope was a luxury I couldn't afford. That night, I asked Andrea to take me back to the training grounds. Not for him. For me. "You just gave birth," he said. "Exactly," I answered. "And they'll assume I'm weak." He stared at me like I'd grown fangs. Then took my hand. "Then let's remind them who you are." The first time I stepped back into the training ring, the guards stared. Some nodded respectfully, others exchanged looks. They weren't used to women in the pit, especially not mothers, especially not me. But when I lifted the training knife and moved like I still remembered how to cut, their respect came fast and absolute. Andrea didn't step in. Not until the 3rd round, when I was already breathless, slick with sweat, and riding a high I didn't know I'd missed. He entered the ring without a word, held up his hands, and waited. I lunged. He dodged, smirked. "You're slower? I'm bleeding less." He grinned, and we moved like 2 people who knew every inch of each other, mind, body, history, future. We didn't fight to win. We fought to remember. Later, lying in the grass outside the ring, I asked him something I'd never dared. What would you have done if I died? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, killed everyone who saw it happen. I nodded. That's what I thought. Then he turned to me, eyes dark, honest, raw, and then I'd have raised her with my bare hands, taught her to burn kingdoms, taught her your name first, so no one would ever forget. I kissed him, because there was no other answer. The next day a package arrived, no return address. Andrea opened it with gloved hands and military precision. Inside, a photograph of me, of Sophia, taken the week before. Through a scope, Andrea didn't say a word, just passed it to me. I studied the photo for 2 seconds, then looked up. I want to choose who dies first. His eyes met mine. Then we'll make a list. We didn't run this time. We prepared. We layered security. We contacted the old loyalists, ones who owed Andrea favors too deep to ignore. And I, freshly healed, freshly furious, began training again. Not for show, not for ego, but for blood. Because the next time they came for us, they weren't walking away. Sophia slept in my arms every night. Marco curled against my other side. And Andrea? He stood by the door, back straight, gun loaded, always watching, always ready. And every time I looked at him, I saw the truth. This wasn't just about legacy anymore. It was about love, the kind that survives cages, the kind that survives blood, the kind that defies death. They tried to break me. They failed. They tried to erase him. They failed harder. They tried to end what we built. But we're still standing, still bleeding, still defiant. I knew the moment it started. It wasn't a cramp, not nerves, not post-birth recovery. It was wrong, too sharp, too low. A hot pressure like something tearing loose deep inside. And it was too early. Sophia was barely a month old. My body had barely healed. But I wasn't bleeding from trauma. I was bleeding from inside. Again, Andrea wasn't in the room, which meant I had about 3 minutes to decide whether to tell him the truth or handle it alone. My instincts were still in survival mode, so I chose alone. I padded barefoot to the bathroom, pressing a palm between my thighs like that could somehow stop what was already happening. The tile was cold, the air sharp. I turned on the water and gripped the sink until my knuckles went white. Then I looked down. Blood. Too much. Not from a wound, not from an incision. Internal. Deep. And something inside me whispered the same word over and over again. Too early. Andrea walked in while I was still gripping the counter. He didn't speak right away, just stared at me, taking in every detail. The towel clutched in my hand, the way I was breathing, the blood smeared down my thigh. His voice dropped to a growl. Who touched you? No one. What happened? I don't know. It just started. He crossed the room in 2 strides and lifted me like I weighed nothing. No resistance. No asking permission. He laid me down on the bed and pressed his hand to my abdomen. Pain? Yes. How much? 7. He gave me a look. I sighed. 9. Luca appeared within 5 minutes, already dialing the doctor. Andrea gave orders like a machine, cold, fast, lethal. Sophia was handed to a nanny. Marco was taken to the lower levels, and I was stripped, cleaned, and re-examined by the same doctor who helped save me after Sophia's birth. This time his hands shook. This isn't right, he said. The lining never fully repaired. The bleeding's internal. Her uterus. Andrea cut him off. Can she survive this? The doctor hesitated. If it doesn't rupture? Yes. And the child? I blinked. What child? The doctor stared. Andrea did, too. Silence stretched too long. Then the doctor said softly, You didn't know? It hit me like a wave. Not grief. Not joy. Just shock. And then fear. Because it meant I was pregnant again. Only weeks after nearly dying in labor, before my body was ready, before I was ready. Andrea sat beside me, didn't touch me, didn't speak. But his presence filled the room like a shadow. I reached for him. He didn't flinch. He just took my hand and held it like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Later, when we were alone, I whispered, I didn't know. He nodded once. I believe you. I didn't even have symptoms. You've been in recovery. Of course you didn't. I looked at him. You're not angry? He turned to me, slow, deliberate. Erica, I would burn the world for one of you. If there's another, I'll destroy heaven too. I wanted to laugh or cry. Instead, I whispered, I don't know if I can survive another birth. He didn't speak, didn't argue, just slid closer, wrapped me in his arms, and pressed a kiss to the top of my head. We'll survive it together. But fate doesn't wait for promises. By morning the bleeding had worsened, and by nightfall I was screaming. Again, the contractions came harder this time, faster. There was no 9 months, no safe zone, no warning, just agony and blood. Andrea held me through it all. Not a word, not a sound, just him, his hands, his voice, his refusal to let go. But even he couldn't slow it, and I already knew the truth. This baby wasn't coming because it was time. This baby was coming because my body couldn't hold on. I don't remember blacking out. I remember the tearing, the pressure, the heat, then nothing. I woke in darkness, silence, pain, and Andrea's voice. Tesoro, come back. I blinked. Everything was white, the sheets, the lights, his shirt, only his eyes stayed dark. I tried to speak. He shook his head. Don't. Just breathe. I looked down. My hands were clean, my arms were empty, but there was a faint sound, a whimper, a heartbeat, a baby, alive. Andrea saw the moment I understood. She's small, he said softly, but she made it. She? He smiled, barely. Sophia's twin. I froze. What? The doctor thinks they split late. Rare. Risky. He exhaled. You carried 2 hearts and didn't even know it. I cried then, for all of it. The pain, the terror, the miracle, and he let me, held me, whispered the names he'd already chosen. 2 girls, he said, 2 daughters, both with your fire. The second child was smaller, quieter. But when they placed her in my arms that night, warm, breathing, real, I knew something else. They hadn't ended anything. Not my blood. Not my body. Not this family. They tried. God, they tried. But I was still here, still alive, and so were both of my daughters. Andrea kissed my forehead like a prayer. You gave me everything, he whispered. Everything they tried to destroy. And when he looked at me, eyes full of something fierce and unbreakable, I knew what came next. We were done hiding, done running. They made a mistake trying to break a woman who bled for her children. Now, it was my turn. They thought they'd broken me in that cage, that watching me bleed, scream, and fall apart was enough to end me. But they forgot something. I didn't give birth in fear. I gave birth in fire. And fire doesn't break, it burns. The second twin, our littlest girl, came into the world the same way her sister did. Too early, too small, too fierce to die. She was born in the dark of a backroom medical setup with barely enough light to see her face and no lullabies but the sound of Andrea's voice swearing he'd keep her safe. And I knew the second I heard her cry. We had just rewritten history. Luca told us later, Raffaele had planned it months ago. Not the attack, not the ransom, not the war, the erasure. To take my body, to take the baby, to take the only heir that could continue the Marcorelli line and use her as a symbol of his victory. But he didn't know there were 2. He didn't know we'd survive. He didn't know Andrea Marcorelli would kneel beside my blood-soaked body and refuse to let me go. He thought he was ending a name. Instead, he birthed a legacy. Sophia slept on my chest. Her sister, smaller, quieter, rested in a heated crib beside me. Andrea never left my side. He paced the room like a lion in a cage, gun still holstered, shirt still stained, eyes flicking to every sound like the war hadn't ended. Because to him it hadn't. They'll try again, he said that night, voice low, rough. They always do. I didn't argue. I just reached for his hand and squeezed. Then let them. It wasn't courage. Not exactly. It was defiance, the kind only a mother earns through agony, the kind only a woman earns when she chooses not to die. I should have been dead, but I wasn't, because I still had more to protect. Andrea named the second twin. I gave him the honor because I knew how deep it ran, how names in his world meant more than legacy. They were armor. He chose Vittoria, victory. We stayed underground for 3 more months, not in a bunker, not in a clinic, in a fortress. One he built before he ever met me. One meant to house ghosts and secrets, not newborn daughters and a woman who refused to break. But it was ours now, and they would never get in again. The press tried to speculate, photos leaked, 2 girls, not 1. Born in secrecy, no official name releases, no public statements, and no photos of me. Andrea made sure of it. If the world wants to know your face, he said, they can die first. But I had my own answer. While he was waging war with silence, I wrote a letter. 1 page, sealed in black wax, delivered by hand to Raffaele's last known contact. It read, You didn't kill me. You crowned me. Her name is Victory. Try again, I dare you. Andrea found out 2 days later. He didn't yell, didn't snap. He stood in the doorway holding Vittoria in one arm, watching me breastfeed Sophia with the calm of a man who knew exactly how close to death he'd been and how violently he planned to protect the reason he wasn't. You baited him. I warned him. His mouth twitched. There's a difference? Yes, I said. One invites attack. the other promises ruin. He stared at me for a long moment, then he crossed the room and kissed the top of my head. You really are mine. The days blurred after that. Midnight feedings, blood checks, security rotations. Our compound became a living organism, breathing and shifting around us. Marco stayed close, too close sometimes, always watching, always listening. Andrea told him the truth in pieces, that I had been hurt, that his sisters had come early, that the people who did it were gone, but not all of them. And Marco, our son, looked up at his father and said, "Then I'll help you find the rest." He was 3, but he was already Marcorelli. The first night I could stand without bleeding, I went outside. The air was sharp, the moon was full. Andrea followed me without speaking. He wrapped a coat around my shoulders, stood behind me, and let the silence settle. Then he said it. The thing I didn't know I needed to. Here, you didn't survive this. I turned. He looked at me, eyes like fire, voice low and dangerous. You won this. That night we made love for the first time since the war ended. Not soft, not slow, but real. Because it wasn't about passion, it was about ownership of our bodies, of our lives, of the story they tried to write without us. He kissed every scar, held my hips like he was relearning what it meant to touch me without fear. I pulled him deeper, closer, until we weren't 2 people anymore. We were a claim. His mouth brushed my ear as he moved, voice guttural and raw. They thought they ended us. I bit back a moan. They failed. He buried his face in my neck and whispered, "They're about to learn how badly." Later, after the heat faded, he lay beside me with one arm wrapped around my waist, the other resting lightly across my stomach. A silence stretched between us. The good kind, the kind that feels like safety. And then softly, I said it. We made a family in hell. His answer was a promise. We'll raise them in fire. The next morning, Sophia opened her eyes before sunrise. So did Vittoria. I sat in bed with both girls in my arms, Andrea behind me, Marco curled between my legs, and I smiled. Because this blood-soaked, war-birthed, bulletproof love, this was the family they tried to end, and this was just the beginning. They tried to erase them, tried to end their bloodline. But she gave birth to 2 daughters in the middle of a war, and he didn't stop fighting until he held all 3 in his arms. This isn't just survival, it's victory. And the story isn't over. Book 3, The Crown and the Coffin, is coming soon. Don't miss the final war. Thank you for spending your time with me, listening to my story. You are the reason I tell it. So subscribe and hit that notification button so that you don't miss the next installment in this war of a love story. Until next time, be ever aware of who you let around you. Not everyone has your best interest of heart. Some stay close to cause you the most pain. They never announced our marriage. No press release. No gold bands. No flowers. No kiss for the cameras. No witnesses. Except Luca, a bleeding priest, and the bodies cooling outside the chapel walls. Andrea slid the ring onto my finger with blood still drying on his knuckles, his voice a whisper that didn't shake. You're mine, always were. Now the world will burn knowing it. We signed no papers, changed no names, but I became Erica Marcorelli the moment he bled for me again, and made it legal in silence. Now everyone who mattered already knew, and everyone who didn't, they'd find out when it was too late to stop us. 3 months later, I stood at the highest window in the Marcorelli estate, watching the garden sway beneath a sheet of rain. Marco was in the north wing, learning the names of weapons I wasn't sure I wanted him to remember. The twins were asleep. One in my arms, one curled in the bassinet beside me. Andrea was gone. Not far. Just deeper into the house. But it still made my skin itch. I'd gotten too used to him being near, too used to the world waiting for another reason to take everything from us again. When I heard the footsteps, I didn't flinch. I just turned. Andrea stepped into the room wearing a black button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, jaw shadowed and unshaven. His shirt was unbuttoned at the throat. His eyes were darker than usual. He'd been in a meeting, and not a pleasant one. Sit, he said, nodding toward the chair beside the cradle. I didn't ask, just did. He crouched in front of me, eyes locked on mine. They're coming. I didn't speak. They want the crown, he added. All of it. They think I'm distracted. Because of me? Because of us. He reached for my hand, still bare except for the ring only he'd ever touched. His thumb brushed across my knuckles. "You don't need to be involved in this," he said quietly. "You've already given more than anyone ever asked." I looked down at the twins, then up at him. "You're wrong," I said. He stilled. I leaned forward, heart thudding in time with the rain outside. "They didn't just try to kill me. They tried to make you weak by hurting me. They thought I was the soft spot in your armor." His jaw tensed. "I'm not," I whispered. "I'm the blade they forgot to check." He stood slowly, towering, silent, striking. But when he kissed me, it wasn't possessive. It was reverent, like I was the one wearing the crown now, and he liked it. Later that night, I found the file he left open on his desk. Names, photos, histories, men and women who'd stayed quiet during the last war, but were moving now. Not with armies, with silence, bribes, deals, poison. They didn't want to fight him out loud. They wanted to choke the throne slowly. Andrea walked in while I was reading. He didn't hide the fact that he knew I'd see it. He wanted me to. "Tell me who dies first," he said. I circled a name in red. He nodded and left the room. No arguments, no hesitation. Because now he understood. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was reigning. The next morning, a convoy arrived at our gates. Not soldiers, not enemies, relatives, extended Marcorelli cousins. The kind who stayed neutral when blood ran in the streets, then crawled back when it dried. They asked to speak to him. Andrea said no, so they asked to speak to me. And that's when I understood exactly what the game was now. They didn't want to challenge the dawn. They wanted to divide the throne. I met them in the courtyard, wearing black, no makeup, no smile. Marco stood beside me, silent, still, watching like his father did. I didn't invite them inside, just listened. "Things are unsettled," one of them said, a cousin whom I didn't care to remember. He glanced at the guards, the rifles, the shuttered windows. "Andrea's enemies are gathering. They think he's distracted." "I'm not," I said flatly. They smiled like I was a child. "You've given him heirs. That's enough. You should be resting, not influencing." It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Dismissive. Dismissal wasn't a mistake I let men repeat. I didn't answer, just turned to Marco and said, "Get your father." Andrea appeared less than 60 seconds later, dressed like war in a tailored suit with his gun still visible under the lapel. He didn't ask what was happening. Didn't wait. Just looked at the cousin. And said, "Leave." They tried to protest. That's when I stepped forward. "Your presence was a courtesy," I said. "One you've wasted." Then, because I needed them to remember, I added, "You won't be invited back." They left. Silent, tense, terrified? Maybe. But one thing was certain. The devil had a wife now, and she didn't need his protection, only his partnership. That night, Andrea poured a glass of wine and sat on the edge of our bed. He didn't look at me for a long time. When he did, his expression was unreadable. "You were supposed to be the reason I softened," he said. I walked to him slowly, sat on his lap, curled one arm around his neck. "I was never here to soften you." "No?" I brushed my lips against his jaw. "I'm the reason you don't shatter." He didn't say a word, just kissed me like the war had already begun. And he was choosing his queen first. The Marcorelli estate used to be a home. Now it breathed like a war machine. Every door reinforced, every hall monitored, every shadow checked twice. Our bedroom windows were bulletproof. Our children slept with trained guards stationed at each exit, and Andrea slept with a gun under his pillow, like it was part of him now. The world hadn't ended when I gave birth in chains. It had paused, held its breath, waiting for him to blink, waiting for me to break. We didn't. And now they were crawling from their graves again, quiet, hungry, reckless. Like forgetting who we were would protect them. The estate hadn't truly slept in weeks. Neither had I. I moved like a ghost through rooms that once held peace, checking cameras, reviewing gate logs, memorizing escape routes I swore we'd never use again. The staff had changed. Loyal ones only. Every outsider vetted 3 times. Still, something felt off, like the walls were warning me. At sunrise, I stood over Vittoria's crib, watching her chest rise and fall in the half-light. She slept like nothing in the world could touch her. And for now, that was true, because I'd already died once to keep her breathing. I wouldn't hesitate to do it again. But as I turned toward the door, a glint of something metallic caught my eye, tucked in the corner behind the curtain. My blood ran cold. I moved closer. Bent down. A wire. Small. Thin. Placed with intention. I didn't scream. I didn't call Andrea. I crushed it under my heel. Slow, deliberate. And then I went hunting. Andrea was in the East Wing. Luca beside him, spreadsheets, dossiers, strategy layouts on the wall. They stopped when they saw me. I didn't speak, just dropped the shredded remains of the wire on the table. Andrea stared at it. Luca swore. Andrea looked at me, voice calm. Where? Nursery window. His hands curled into fists so tight I heard the bones crack. Internal? I nodded once. His face didn't change, not visibly, but I felt it. The kill switch behind his eyes being flipped back on. 10 minutes later, the compound was locked down. No one in, no one out. Every hallway re-scanned, every staff member re-interviewed, every weapon counted, even the cooks were interrogated. This wasn't paranoia, it was a purge. By midnight, only one person was missing from the check-in list. A young housemaid, new. Quiet, cleared by Luca twice. Andrea tracked her to the service quarters. Her room was empty. Her tracker, a new standard, disabled. Her comms unit left behind. But her cell phone? Still warm. Andrea held the device in his hand as he turned to me. She got sloppy, or scared. Either way, he said, eyes like frost, she gave us something. The last number she called was local, unregistered, disposable, but traced, and that led to a garage across the city, one we used to own, now held by an independent contractor with ties to 3 rival families, and a contract out on Marco's name. Andrea didn't flinch when he read it. He handed me the file. I read it twice, and then asked, do I make the call? He looked at me like he already knew the answer. You're not the girl who ran anymore, Tesoro. I called the contractor myself. No threats, no screaming, just my voice, cold and quiet. You sent someone for my son. Silence, then. Who is this? I didn't answer. I let the silence burn, then added, I know where you sleep. He laughed. Wrong move. Lady Marcorelli, he said, mocking. Tell your husband he should have stayed soft. I liked him better that way. I hung up, turned to Andrea. Burn it. By dawn, the garage was ash. The contractor's men, those who didn't run, were removed. The contractor himself? Gone. For now, but the message was sent. This wasn't a house anymore. This was a fortress. And I wasn't the hostage in the cage anymore. I was the woman who ordered the fire. 2 days later, Andrea and I sat in the upstairs study watching the sun rise over the outer walls. He hadn't slept. Neither had I. But there was no exhaustion, only calculation. They're waiting, he said, waiting for one more mistake. They think the cage broke me. They think the crown weakened me. I looked at him. He looked at me. Neither of us blinked. Then he said it, quiet, like it hurt to admit. I don't trust anyone but you. You shouldn't. If something happens to me, no. You protect them. You protect you. No. His jaw clenched. I'm not planning for if, Andrea, only when, and... You're not allowed to die first. I'm not planning to. I moved closer, brushing my hand over his chest, right over the heartbeat that still felt like war drums. But if you go down, I whispered, I take the throne. His breath caught. Is that a threat? No. I met his eyes. It's a promise. He kissed me hard. No softness, no fear, just fire and teeth and the taste of loyalty. And when we broke apart, he whispered it like a vow. Then we make them bleed first. The first name he ever wrote in blood was his brother's. He never talks about it, never says the words. But I see it sometimes, in the way Andrea stares at the old family ledger like it's a coffin he's already climbed out of once. The book itself is ancient, leather-bound, heavy, frayed around the edges. Inside are names, some crossed out, some circled, some burned through so deeply the paper is missing. He calls it strategy. I call it a graveyard. Andrea keeps the ledger in the war room. No one touches it but him, not even Luca. But this morning, he handed it to me, just offered it across the table, his jaw tight and unreadable. I want you to know what I've chosen, he said. What we've chosen, I corrected. He didn't argue. The names started small, street-level lieutenants, mid-tier dealers, peripheral players who slipped through the cracks when Raffaele fell. But they weren't silent anymore. They were moving, slow and strategic, death by whispers. Their goal wasn't to take the throne by storm. It was to rot it from underneath, cut off loyalty, fracture reputation, seed rumors until the bloodline collapsed from within. Andrea had seen it before. So had I. And now we were going to end it before it started. There were 3 names unmarked, uncrossed, but circled in red ink like a target. Andrea hadn't pulled the trigger on yet. You spared them, I said quietly. His fingers tapped the table. Not spared, saved, for leverage. They wouldn't do the same for you. I don't expect them to. That wasn't the point. Not for him. Andrea didn't act out of mercy. He acted out of positioning. Even a rotten piece on the board could block a stronger move. But I stared at those names, those men who laughed when I was chained and bleeding, who watched as I screamed my daughters into the world, and I felt something I hadn't allowed myself in months. Rage. You were going to use them, I said, but they used us instead. He met my gaze. You think I'm wrong? No, I said. I think it's time you let me be right. He didn't speak for a long time, didn't move, and then slowly he slid the pen across the table to me. Then write it. I didn't hesitate, didn't blink, didn't care that my hands shook. I took the pen, and I wrote my first name in blood. Not literal, but close enough. The ink was dark, heavy, permanent. When I was done, I looked up. Andrea hadn't taken his eyes off me once. You just sentenced a man to death, he said. I held his gaze. No, I whispered. I sentenced us to peace. That afternoon, the hit was ordered. Quiet, precise, no mess, no chaos. Just one name removed from the board. The other two? Still circled, still useful. But they knew now. The woman they thought was leverage had become the knife. That night, I stood on the balcony outside our room, staring at the estate wall. It looked the same as it always did, but I could feel it shifting. Andrea came up behind me, hands on my waist. You did well today, he said. I didn't do it for approval. I know. His breath was warm at my neck, his voice low. You did it for the throne. I turned slightly. Do you have a problem with that? His answer wasn't words. It was a kiss, slow and searing. When he finally pulled back, his voice was hoarse. I married the right woman. Later, after the twins were fed and Marco was asleep, we sat side by side in the war room again. One glass of wine between us, the ledger still open, 2 names still circled. I pointed to the second. What makes him dangerous? Andrea leaned forward, eyes sharp. He owns silence. Elaborate. He controls a network of whisper channels, blackmail, off-record contracts, loyalty trades. Is he loyal to anyone? To fear, he said, and profit. Then he's not loyal at all. Andrea gave a faint nod. And the third? I asked. Andrea's face shifted, just slightly, but I caught it. He looked away for a beat before answering. She used to be loyal. She? He nodded once. Elena Vitale, former liaison between Marcorelli and Vitale families before the collapse. I narrowed my eyes. Former? She walked away when the war started, said she didn't choose sides. Neutrality isn't loyalty. No, he said softly, but it wasn't betrayal, not then. But now? She's feeding intel to someone. I don't know who. Do you want her dead? He looked at me. Long, quiet, torn. I don't want her dead, he said. Then what do you want? Andrea's hand curled into a fist on the table. I want her to regret choosing the wrong side. I stared at the page. Elena Vitale, a woman who knew his past, who might have once had his trust, maybe even more. And yet he'd circled her name anyway. That meant something. It meant he was letting me decide what she became now. Threat, leverage, memory, or enemy. I picked up the pen again. Andrea watched me, silent. But this time, I didn't cross the name out. I didn't circle it either. I just put a question mark beside it and slid the book back to him. You'll know what she is when the time comes, I said. And if I don't, then I will. Andrea didn't speak again that night, but when we went to bed, he curled around me like he'd never stop holding on, and just before sleep claimed us both, I heard him whisper it into my skin. The next name I write, a pause, a breath. It'll be the last. He was only 4. 4 years old, and already the world whispered his name like a promise or a threat. Marco Marcorelli, Andrea's heir. My son. Not by blood, but by something stronger. By choice. By war. By the night I wrapped his tiny body in a blanket and ran into hell to save him from the men who wanted him dead before he could take his first breath. Now he stood in the south courtyard with a wooden training knife in his hand, feet planted, jaw tight, eyes sharp. Luca watched from a distance, arms crossed, correcting his stance with nothing but a nod. He didn't look like a baby anymore. He looked like a boy becoming something harder, something dangerous. And I wasn't sure how I felt about that. He's learning faster than I did. Andrea's voice came from behind me, low and quiet. I didn't turn, just watched our son block a swing and counter, too fast, too clean. That's not comforting, I said softly. He needs to know how to survive. He's 4, Andrea, and death doesn't care. I turned then, my chest tight. He's a child. Andrea's face didn't change, but I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was trying to be right. I wasn't ready when my father died, he said. I thought I was, but I wasn't. I won't let that happen to him. You think you're going to die? I think we've made too many enemies to pretend we're immortal. I stepped closer, lowered my voice. Then teach him how to live before you teach him how to kill. Andrea looked at me like he wanted to argue, but couldn't. So instead, he reached out and pulled me into his arms, pressing a kiss to the side of my head. I just want him to have a chance. So do I whispered, but I want him to smile too. We stood like that for a moment, watching Marco disarm a grown man with surprising grace. Then, a crack, a boom. The sky didn't break, the earth didn't shake, but the sound, sharp, mechanical, deliberate, cut through the air like a scream. My blood froze. Luca moved instantly, covering Marco with his body as the guards surged forward. Andrea's arm went rigid around me. "Get inside," he said, but I was already moving. By the time we reached the courtyard, Marco was safe, shaken, but breathing. The smoke was faint, coming from a scorched patch of gravel near the front gates. No explosion, no casualties, just a device, a message. Andrea crouched beside it, eyes scanning, mouth pressed in a line. "No shrapnel," he said. "No fire, not meant to kill." "Then what?" I asked. He looked up at me. It was meant to scare him. Marco stood between two guards, fists clenched, tears in his eyes, but he didn't cry. He just looked at the spot where the bomb had gone off and whispered, "They tried to make me afraid." My heart cracked. Andrea walked over to him, knelt. "You did nothing wrong," he said quietly. Marco's chin trembled. "I didn't run. I know." Andrea reached for him, rested a hand on his small shoulder. "But it's okay to be scared. Courage isn't not feeling fear. It's choosing to stand anyway." Marco blinked up at him, then nodded once. Strong, fierce. God help me, he looked just like Andrea. Later that night, the house was silent. The twins were asleep. Marco had been tucked into bed between us, refusing to be alone. Andrea sat in the dark war room with the detonation device on the table. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, trying not to fall apart. "Why him?" I asked. "They want the line to break before it begins." "They already tried with me. They failed." Andrea's jaw tightened, and now they know how much it cost them. I walked to him slowly, sat across the table, watched the shadows crawl across his face. "You think this was a warning?" He shook his head. "This was a test, to see if he's still the weakness." Andrea's eyes locked on mine. "But he isn't. Not anymore." I reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't pull away. "You love him," I said. Andrea exhaled. "I never wanted to, but yes, and he loves you." "I know." "So now," I whispered, "we teach him what you never had." Andrea's brows drew together. "What's that?" I smiled faintly. "Hope." The next morning, Marco came to the breakfast table dressed in his usual black shirt and tiny combat boots, but he had something new tucked under his arm. A drawing. He placed it in front of Andrea with a serious expression. It was crude, but clear. A castle, a crown, a small figure with a sword, and two babies in his arms. "That's me," he said. "That's protecting them." Andrea didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at the paper like it was a map to something he hadn't believed in until now. "Will you help me?" Marco asked. Andrea's voice was hoarse. "With what?" "With building it, so they don't get hurt again." Andrea reached out and pulled him into his lap, holding him close, burying his face in the boy's hair. And when he looked at me across the table, there were tears in his eyes, but not the broken kind, the changed kind, the kind that said, if they want to break this bloodline, they'll have to go through all of us first. They came at midnight, not with war drums, not with declarations, just silence, steel, and a map they thought was still accurate. But this wasn't the same house anymore, and I wasn't the same woman. I woke to the sound of glass shattering, not loud, not frantic, just precise. One window, north corridor. Andrea was already out of bed, barefoot, shirtless, gun in hand, before I had fully registered the echo. He didn't speak, didn't hesitate, just looked at me and nodded once. "Stay." "Lock the door." I didn't. The twins were already hidden. Panic protocol had been drilled into every wall, every guard, every breath of this house. Marco was with Luca, tucked behind bulletproof steel in the sub-basement. Andrea moved like a ghost down the hallway, lethal and cold. And I followed 3 paces behind, armed, unshaking. They were already inside. 3 men. Masks, no insignia, no sound. But they made one mistake. They didn't check the mirrors. Andrea caught the first one at the corner. Bullet through the skull. No hesitation. The second turned. Too late. I shot him in the leg. He dropped with a scream. Andrea finished him. The third ran. Big mistake. We didn't chase him. We didn't need to. Our walls don't let people go when they enter uninvited. By sunrise, the house was calm again. Bodies cleared. No one dead on our side. But the message was carved into the floor, a spray of blood leading from the window to the staircase. A red trail to our children, a warning or a promise. Andrea sat in the war room with the last intruder tied to the chair. Blood dripped from his nose. His hands were bound with wire, not rope. His mouth gagged. Andrea waited until I entered before speaking. You know who he is? No, but he knew where to come in, Andrea said. He knew which window was blind. He crouched in front of the man, pulled off the gag. What was the plan? Silence. Andrea didn't blink. Tell me, and I'll make it quick. The man smirked, bloody teeth and bravado. She wasn't supposed to, shoot. He looked at me. You've got a hell of a wife. Andrea smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but like death. Yes, he said, I do. We didn't get a name, but we didn't need one. His tattoo gave him away. Small, behind the ear, old family crest, Baresi, not dead, just pretending. Andrea made one phone call, a code word, a time, a location. No names, no threats, just an invitation to a funeral. The next morning, the staff dressed the estate in black, unusual maybe, for a house that hadn't lost anyone. But that was the point. The message wasn't for us. It was for the ones watching, the ones who still thought they had time. When the Baresi family arrived, they found Andrea waiting at the gates, alone, unarmed, at least visibly. I watched from the balcony, heart pounding, pulse like thunder. 3 cars, 7 men, 1 woman. Andrea opened the gate himself, let them walk in. And then, he pointed to the garden, fresh dirt, 3 headstones, no names. Just space. He looked the oldest Baresi in the eye and said, I've already dug your graves. They tried to laugh, but they didn't make it past the second breath, because that's when the guards stepped out of the shadows. 12 men, guns drawn, and Andrea? He pulled out a lighter, simple, silver, lit it once, let the flame flicker, then dropped it onto a stack of their own family's flags, drenched in gasoline. Fire consumed the cloth in seconds, and then silence. He didn't kill them. Not yet, he let them leave. But he made one thing clear. Next time, there would be no warnings. Later that night, I sat in the nursery with Vittoria asleep in my arms and Alessia curled against my chest. Andrea leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, shirt wrinkled from the fight. They underestimated you again, he said. They always do. You looked down from that balcony like a queen ready to watch a beheading. I smiled faintly. I was hoping for one. He chuckled once, dry and tired, then stepped forward, kissed the top of my head. Give it to you next time. I looked up at him. Why didn't you kill them? His face changed. Not regret, not softness, just calculation. Because war makes noise. I want silence before I burn them. When the house fell quiet, Andrea joined me on the edge of our bed. We didn't sleep, didn't talk, just stared out the window at the 3 graves we hadn't filled, yet. And when I finally whispered, they think we're bleeding, he answered without looking at me. Let them. A pause. Then he turned. I want them to think we're vulnerable. Why? Because it'll make their screams more satisfying when they realize they were wrong. He didn't say another word, but I heard it anyway, in his breath, in his pulse, in the way he pulled me into his arms and held me like the only thing worth saving. This is the last time they touch what's mine, and I believed him. Because the next coffin they dig, it won't be for us. War used to mean bullets. Now it starts with whispers, inheritance claims, legitimacy disputes, documents surfaced from ashes we thought had already been burned. The Baresi family had failed to kill us, so now they wanted to erase us instead. If they couldn't bury our bodies, they'd try to bury the bloodline. It started with a letter, hand-delivered. No signature. Addressed to Erica Marcorelli, consort, not wife. Inside, a forged document with an old seal, claiming Andrea had no legal heir, that his children were illegitimate, that our marriage was never official, that the empire needed a pure successor. And if that successor wasn't born of blood, then it could be taken by someone who was. I read the letter twice. Andrea didn't. He crumpled it without a word, tossed it into the fireplace, and lit it with the same match he used for executions. They're desperate, he said. They're organized. Andrea turned to me. You think this will work? I think if it's on paper, someone believes it already has. He paced across the study, jaw tense, shadows carving deep into his face. They're going after legacy, he muttered. Not land, not guns, name. And who gave them the idea we'd care? He stopped, met my eyes. Neither of us said it, but we both knew the answer. Marco. They wanted to delegitimize Marco first, because he wasn't mine by blood, because he was ours by choice, because I'd saved him, claimed him, but not conceived him. Which made him vulnerable to old rules, to broken traditions, to men who still thought purity was more powerful than loyalty. The next attack wasn't a bomb, it was a whisper campaign through old allies. Family heads once loyal to Andrea were now being offered alternatives. Distant Marcorelli cousins with clean pedigrees and no scandal, willing to marry, willing to negotiate, willing to sit on the throne without blood on their hands. But that's the thing, this crown, it's soaked in blood. And Andrea didn't rise to power by washing his hands of it. He bathed in it. You have two options, Luca said, standing in the war room beside us. Shut them down quietly, or kill the narrative publicly. Andrea didn't speak. He just looked at me and waited. He always waits for me now. My voice, my decision, my crown. Both, I said. We do both. Andrea nodded once, and then moved. The first step was silence. We located the origin of the forged document, a corrupt notary who had once worked for the Baresi legal team. He disappeared, voluntarily unlikely. The second step was noise. We made a statement, not to the press, not to the streets, to them, a private gathering, 40 allies, no phones, no recordings. Andrea walked in with Marco at his side, hand on his shoulder like a king presenting his prince. I followed with Alessia in my arms and Vittoria clinging to my hand. No words, just presence, and for some presence is enough, but not for all. One man dared to speak. An uncle from the northern branch. Older, bitter, never duress until now, he stood and said, "This child," pointing at Marco, "was not born of her. He's not blood." Andrea didn't move, didn't flinch, just tilted his head, and yet, he said, "He is my heir." The man kept going. "Bloodlines are power. You can't rewrite that with sentiment." "No," I said, "but you can rewrite them with fire." Andrea took Marco's hand, pulled him closer, and in a voice that silenced the entire room, he said, "He is the boy whose mother died in my bed. He is the child who survived when others tried to end him. He is the reason I buried a kingdom and built another. He is mine, and if you try to take him from me, you'll be buried beside the last man who tried." No one spoke after that, no one stood, and the man who'd opened his mouth didn't return to the north. He never left the estate at all. Later that night, I found Andrea alone in the chapel. Candles flickering. No prayers, just stillness. He sat in the pews staring at the marble altar where no gods had answered him before. "Are you angry?" he asked, voice rough. I sat beside him. "No." "Then what?" "Tired." He nodded. "I spent years preparing for wars. I could see," he said. "This one feels like drowning." I reached for his hand. "I was drowning once, too." He looked at me. "When?" "The night I stole your son." Silence. Then he whispered it. "You saved him." "I know." He turned fully to me, cupped my face in both hands. "You saved me." We didn't cry. Not there. Not then. But something old inside him cracked again, and something stronger took its place. By morning, the message had been delivered. Marco stays. The crown holds. The bloodline doesn't end with a signature. And the war? The war was just getting personal again. Because now they knew. If they wanted to rewrite our legacy, they'd have to kill the boy who made us a family. And we were ready to kill them first. They never expected me to survive him. They never expected me to stay. They expected a mistress, a nursemaid, a soft thing that warmed the devil's bed and fled when the fire got too hot. But I didn't flee. I learned to burn. When I walked into the inner chamber of the estate that morning, the heads of 3 allied families were already seated at Andrea's table. Men, twice my age, men who'd bled beside him, men who didn't look at me because they didn't know how to. Until now, I'd always stayed just outside the ring, present but not central, the woman who bore his daughters, who mothered his heir, who almost died for this house. But now I sat beside him, not behind. And when Andrea poured a second glass of wine, he didn't hand it to anyone else. He handed it to me. "You summoned us," one of them said carefully. Andrea didn't answer. He looked at me. I met the man's gaze, calm. I did. There was a pause, a flicker of something uncertain in the room. "She speaks now?" another muttered, half under his breath. Andrea leaned back slowly. "I thought you said you wanted strength in the bloodline," he said. "You didn't specify which blood." The message was clear, and it wasn't just performative. Andrea had always ruled alone. But something had shifted, not in power, in proximity. They hadn't killed me. They hadn't broken me. They hadn't erased our daughter. So now, instead of watching from the edge of his kingdom, I was seated at its heart, and some of them hated it. "You bring a woman to this meeting," the oldest one said, his voice low, "but not Luca?" I didn't let Andrea answer. "He's coordinating a cleanup in Palermo," I said, "where your cousin failed to shut down the pipeline, again." The man stiffened. Andrea smirked. "She notices things," he said like it was a compliment. "You should be grateful." "I'm not ungrateful," the man said carefully. "I'm just surprised." "Don't be," I said. "Well, you'll be seeing a lot more of me." The conversation turned to weapons. Next, shipments rerouted, hands greased. Barisi interference in Port Authority. Andrea let them speak, let them posture, and then interrupted with 3 words, "She has the list." I slid a dossier across the table. Timelines, ports, customs officers bought and paid for by Barisi cousins who'd survived the purge. One man stared at the folder like it might explode. Another turned pale. "You've been tracking this?" one asked, incredulous. "For months," I said. "Since the day they took me." "Why not say anything?" Andrea answered for me. "Because she doesn't speak until she has something worth saying." That silenced the room and shifted something deeper. No longer just Andrea's woman, no longer the girl who ran, no longer the mother in the tower. I wasn't on the chessboard anymore. I was the move. When the men left, Andrea didn't speak right away. He stood at the window, hands in his pockets, watching the gravel drive like it might crack open. "You were perfect," he said quietly. I stepped up behind him. "I wasn't trying to be perfect." "No," he said, voice thick. "You were trying to be undeniable." He turned, took my face in his hands. "You weren't supposed to rule." "I know. But now you are." "I didn't want this," I whispered. "I didn't either." His thumbs brushed my cheekbones. "But now we're here," I nodded. "And we don't bend." We didn't kiss. Not then. Just stood together, foreheads touching. 2 people who never asked to wear crowns but learned to kill for the right to keep them. That night, the children slept easily. The house was still. And I found myself walking alone through the hall of portraits. The Marcorelli bloodline was painted in oil and dust, shadowed eyes and cruel mouths, power passed down from man to man like a loaded weapon. And at the end, a blank frame, saved for Andrea. But I paused in front of it, took a pen from the hall table and wrote my name in the corner of the canvas. Small, defiant, permanent, because I was never supposed to rule. But now I do. It started with a whisper, then a message burned into the side of a delivery truck. "Tomorrow belongs to us." Baresi graffiti, bright red, sloppy, public. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't smart. It was war. Andrea stood in the courtyard, staring at it like it was already a body. Luca stood beside him, phone pressed to his ear, voice low as he relayed orders. But Andrea didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared at the paint dripping down steel like blood that hadn't finished bleeding yet. I stepped up beside him, shielding my eyes from the sun. "They want a reaction," I said. "They'll get one," he answered. "But not the one they think." Andrea finally turned to me. "No. Better." That night, we didn't sleep. No one did. The estate pulsed with movement. Guards rearmed, vehicles checked, safes opened, lists updated. This wasn't panic, it was precision. We weren't preparing for if, we were preparing for when. Andrea sat in the war room with 4 maps spread across the table. Port cities, back routes, safe houses. Luca barked updates from the hall. 2 lieutenants confirmed dead, 3 allies compromised, 1 safe house burned. They'd been planning this longer than we realized, longer than the graffiti, longer than the letter, possibly since the moment our daughter took her first breath. I studied the maps, following the red circles Andrea had drawn in silence. "These are all territory weak points," I said. "They're not trying to conquer," he replied. "They're trying to make us scatter, divide us, dilute us. So tomorrow isn't a throne," I whispered. "It's a void." Andrea nodded once. "They want my heir to inherit ashes." I looked at him then, and the fury in his face wasn't loud. It was cold, calculated, caged, the most dangerous kind. "They don't get tomorrow," he said. "They don't even get tonight." The first retaliation wasn't a bullet. It was a story, a leak. Andrea gave his blessing for one journalist, buried under 3 layers of aliases, to discover an old Baresi smuggling line. The authorities raided it within 12 hours. Arrests, seizures, international headlines. Baresi cousins caught mid-transaction, red-handed and humiliated. The next move, more intimate. Our own men knocked on 27 doors across the city. They didn't kick them in. They didn't fire a single shot. They just said one thing. He knows what you did. No explanation, no demands, just the fear of being known. And fear spreads faster than blood. But the Baresi family still struck back. Hard. 2 men from Andrea's original inner circle were executed within the week. Messages carved into their skin before they were dumped at the edge of the estate. The past dies with us. Andrea didn't react. He reloaded. He didn't cry. He called in blood markers owed from before I ever knew him. Old allies, one-time enemies, and one ghost, Elena Vitale. I heard the name and froze, not from jealousy, from memory. She'd once held his loyalty, maybe his heart, then disappeared when the war began. But now she returned and walked through our gates like someone resurrected. She was beautiful, not threatening, not submissive, just aware. She walked into the war room, looked at me first, and said, "He trusts you." I didn't blink. He doesn't have to. Elena nodded once, then I do. We didn't fight. We didn't become friends, but we understood one thing. The war for tomorrow couldn't be won by ghosts, only by those still bleeding. That night, Marco stood at the doorway of our room in his pajamas, holding a toy dagger. "Is it safe yet?" he asked. Andrea knelt in front of him. "No," he said, "but we're making it." Marco looked at him. Serious, small, unafraid. "Then I'll help." Andrea smiled. "You already are." After he fell asleep between us, curled up with one twin on either side, Andrea whispered against my shoulder. "They'll never take him," I whispered back. "They'll never take us." And somewhere beyond the gates, the war pulsed on. But we didn't break. We didn't bend, because the future wasn't up for negotiation. It was born in blood, and it belonged to us. The morning started with silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that's too clean, too measured. Andrea knew it first. I felt it second. Even the children sensed it. Marco asked why the birds weren't singing. Alessia clung to my leg without reason. Vittoria whimpered in her sleep. The air was wrong, too still, like the house itself was holding its breath. Andrea sat at the breakfast table, coffee untouched, phone buzzing once, then not again. "I don't like this," I said. He didn't answer, just tapped the encrypted tablet, pulled up a live security map. One red dot blinked twice, then vanished. "Where was that?" I asked. "Eastern perimeter, south gate." "Was?" He set the tablet down. "They're testing our blind spots again." I didn't have to ask who they was. The Baresi family wasn't just pushing, they were measuring, looking for one crack, one angle of entry. And this time they didn't send a bomb, they sent something colder. The box arrived at noon. No name, no return address. No guard saw who left it. Just a black SUV caught 2 seconds on camera before the feed glitched. Inside the box was velvet. Inside the velvet, a crown, burned, bent, shattered down the middle like a broken tooth. And beside it, a coffin nail. Andrea stared at it without touching. Luca stood by the door, already calling the cleanup team. I just looked at the metal, still streaked with soot, and whispered, "They're making a prophecy." Andrea's eyes snapped to mine. "They think you're dying," I said. "They think the next funeral is yours." Andrea stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and lifted the ruined crown with both hands. His face didn't change, but his voice turned ice. "They buried the wrong king last time." That night, he didn't sleep. He didn't come to bed. He sat in the war room with the crown still on the table, maps laid out, routes drawn, alliances activated. I watched him from the door. He didn't look broken. He looked reborn. The man I met in the beginning, he was fire and fury. But this man was smoke, quiet, suffocating, unstoppable. "They sent it to shake us," I said softly. "It didn't work." "It did," Andrea replied. I stepped in. "What?" He looked at me then, something dark flickering in his gaze. It reminded me who I am. He stood, walked around the table, held my face in his hands like I was something holy. "They thought the crown was mine," he said, "but I never wanted it. You wear it anyway. For them," he said. "For you. For our son." He let out a breath. "But now they've offered me a coffin." My chest tightened. "And?" Andrea leaned down, lips brushing my ear. "Let them build it." I froze. He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. "Let them build it," he repeated. "And when they gather to watch me die..." A pause, a smile that could kill. "I'll bury them in it instead." The next day, Andrea made a move no one expected. He called a summit. Open invitation. Enemies included. No weapons allowed. Neutral ground. A promise of truce, just for one day. Even Luca flinched when he heard it. "They'll think you're desperate," he said. "I want them to." Someone will bring a weapon. I'm counting on it. When he told me he was going alone, I laughed. No, I said, you're not. Erica, I'm not asking. He looked at me. Really looked, and he nodded. Just once. I knew you'd say that. The summit was held at the Marcorelli ancestral estate, long abandoned, now rebuilt for one purpose, the illusion of peace. I wore black, not for mourning, for warning. Andrea wore gray, neutral, unthreatening, deceptive. 12 families arrived, all seated in a circle of glass and stone, and in the center, Andrea and I stood together, side by side, not king and queen, not Don and consort, just them, the two they couldn't kill. Andrea spoke first, not loud, not demanding, just even. I received a crown and a coffin this week. No one interrupted. He held up the ruined metal. It reminded me of two things. A pause. 1, you never really knew who I was. 2, you never understood what I'd become if you touched my family again. He turned, nodded at me, and I stepped forward. They thought I wouldn't survive, I said. Thought I was just the girl who ran. I looked around the room, slowly, deliberately. You all wrote me off. I was never meant to rule, never meant to carry his name, never meant to hold his children and survive the war, meant to erase them. I leaned forward just slightly. But I did. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was fear, recognition, realization. Then someone stood, Baresi blood, young, cocky, stupid. He pulled a blade from his coat. Then die with him. But he didn't reach me, because Marco was in the rafters, Andrea's order, a final test, a contingency. And when the blade came down, Marco fired. The man dropped, chest bleeding, dead before he hit the floor. 12 heads turned. 12 mouths gaped. Andrea didn't blink. He's 4, he said. And already more man than any of you. We left before they could recover. No more speeches. No more warnings. Just blood on the marble and silence in our wake. Back at the estate, I held Marco tight. He didn't cry. But I did. Not from fear, from the knowledge that this was the world we'd built, one where a child saved his mother in a room full of men who would have killed her. Andrea came to me that night with a simple truth. I don't want the crown. I looked at him. What do you want? His voice was quiet. Peace. I took his hand, held it against my chest. Then let's finish it. Because the war wasn't over, but the end had finally begun. Power doesn't ask for your name. It takes it. And the longer you sit on the throne, the more of yourself it demands. Andrea knew this. He'd always known. But he never said it out loud, until the night I found him alone in the chapel again, staring at a cracked portrait of his father. The man who built the house, built the empire, then let it rot from the inside out. He died thinking he was invincible, Andrea murmured. I stood beside him in the candlelight, arms folded over my chest. And you don't? His mouth twitched. No, he said. I die a little more every time they make me choose between peace and blood. He looked at me, then lower, at my stomach, flat now, but still bearing the weight of our war-born daughter. You should have run again. I reached up, touched the line of his jaw. I did. Straight into your fire. We didn't speak for a while, not about the plans, not about the next strike, just silence. The kind that's only safe when it belongs to two people who've already bled for each other. The next morning, we sat in the war room. No guards, no Luca, just the two of us, and one sheet of paper. It held 12 names, the final council of power beneath the Marcorelli crown, some loyal, some not. Andrea stared at them like ghosts. These are the last ones left, he said. To kill? To choose. I sat beside him, legs folded, bare feet against the cold tile. What happens if they all say no? He looked up. Then we burn it all. We didn't speak of the children, not then, but the truth hovered between us anyway. If we won, they'd inherit a crown born in blood. If we lost, they'd bury us both. The first to arrive was loyal. He knelt, spoke an oath, offered his house, his weapons, his sons. The second did the same. The third hesitated, but kissed my hand and said, she made him stronger. And then the fourth didn't come at all. Luca called from the gate. He's fled, took his family, all assets frozen, but he's moving toward Baresi territory. Andrea's voice was like steel. Let him think we don't care. Luca hesitated. You don't want him brought in? No, Andrea said. I want him watched. That night, I sat at the edge of our bed, robe slipping off one shoulder, candlelight flickering across my skin. Andrea walked in slow, shirt unbuttoned, blood still drying on his cuff. He didn't speak. He just knelt in front of me, head lowered, hands on my thighs. I killed a man today, he whispered. One who once held me when I was a boy. My throat tightened. I'm sorry. He looked up at me. I'm not. We didn't touch, didn't kiss, just sat in the quiet space between forgiveness and necessity, because this throne, it wasn't made for love, but somehow we found it anyway. The next morning word arrived. Baresi was assembling in Palermo. Not covert, not subtle. An open challenge. Final positioning. Andrea stood in front of the map, hands behind his back, eyes cold. Tomorrow. Luca blinked. You want to move that fast? She's waited long enough. He didn't look at me when he said it, but I felt it anyway. That night, I wrote letters. 3. One for Marco, one for each of the twins. I didn't tell Andrea, just sealed them, labeled them, tucked them into the safe with my wedding ring, the one I still didn't wear. Not yet. In the hours before dawn, Andrea came to me in the nursery. I was already awake, sitting in the rocking chair, Alessia in my arms. She won't remember this war, I said. He crouched beside me, but she'll know who won it. When we rose, we dressed in black. Not mourning, preparation, no speeches, no ritual, just war, and the unspoken promise that one of us, maybe both, might not come back. In the convoy, Andrea reached for my hand, held it tight, not like goodbye, like a vow. We take the throne, he said. I nodded. Together. He didn't smile, but his grip never loosened. As Palermo's gates came into view, I saw the outline of the old Baresi villa, fortified and arrogant, but even kings bleed. And tonight we weren't coming to negotiate, we were coming to end it. The first shot wasn't ours. It came from the second floor of the Baresi villa, shattering the front windshield of our lead vehicle. Andrea didn't flinch. He opened the door, stepped out into open air, and walked. Not fast, not hidden, like the bullet had only confirmed what he already knew. This was the end. Not of him, of them. Luca covered him from the right, 2 men flanked his left. But Andrea didn't need protection. He was the weapon. The gate groaned open, mechanical and slow, revealing a courtyard stained with history, ours and theirs. Baresi men waited, armed, postured, desperate. They thought he was coming to talk. They were wrong. I exited the SUV seconds later. Not dressed for war, dressed like a queen. Black coat, black gloves, my hair twisted into a knot too sharp to unravel. No blood on me yet, but I felt it coming. Andrea looked back once. We didn't speak, just a glance. He was the king coming to reclaim his kingdom. I was the devil's woman coming to burn it. Baresi stood at the top of the stairs, not the cousin who ordered my kidnapping, not the man who watched my daughter be born in chains. They were dead already. This one was worse. He smiled. I see you brought your ghost, he said, nodding toward me. Andrea's voice cut like a blade. Say her name again. The man chuckled. She shouldn't even be alive. That's the problem with your family, I said, stepping forward. You think survival is a mistake. Baresi's face shifted. Andrea didn't wait for another insult. He drew his gun and fired. Point blank, right into the marble at the man's feet. The shot wasn't meant to kill. It was a promise. The next one would be earned. Where are the children? Baresi asked. His tone too casual, too cruel. He wanted to shake us, unsettle us. Andrea didn't answer. I did. Safe, I said. Far from this place, far from your reach. Baresi clicked his tongue. Please, what a shame. I always wondered if the second one would be louder than the first. Andrea moved so fast, I didn't see the punch coming, just the aftermath. Baresi sprawled on the marble, blood leaking from his mouth. The guards lifted their weapons. Luca lifted his. Andrea didn't need to lift anything. They all froze. You want to make a claim? Andrea asked coldly. You want to wear a crown made of my name, my blood, my dead? He walked forward, every step a threat. Then take it. No one moved. Take it. The silence was deafening, and in that pause, something shifted. Not fear. Power. His. Ours. Undeniable. I am not my father, Andrea said. I don't rule from fear. I rule because no one else deserves to. He turned to me, held out his hand. I took it, walked beside him to the stairs. He stepped up first, but it was me who turned back to face the court. You thought killing us would end this, I said. But we were reborn in fire, and now? I glanced down at the men still armed, still unsure. You'll either kneel to this house, I looked at Andrea, or be buried beneath it. They didn't kneel immediately. They didn't need to. We didn't come for ceremony. We came for control. And control had already shifted. They just hadn't realized it yet. It was Luca who made the first move. He walked forward, looked each Baresi man in the eye, and said one name, Marco. The child they tried to erase. The boy born of grief and war. The heir who lived. He's already smarter than half of you, Luca said, and twice as loyal. Then he looked at us. And he's ready. Baresi's men began to lower their weapons, one by one, not because they trusted us, but because they knew. It was over. The war was done, and the kingdom belonged to the devil's family now. Andrea didn't smile. He turned, walked up the last stair, and stepped into the Baresi house like it was his birthright. I followed, and as the doors closed behind us, I whispered, "They'll still come. I know. We still have enemies. I hope so." He looked at me. Finally, eyes soft in a way I didn't know a man like him could carry, because that means we still have something worth protecting. We stood in the heart of the enemy's home and didn't feel fear, because we'd already survived worse. We'd survived death, survived betrayal, survived each other. Now, we ruled. The kingdom was his, but the fire, that was mine. It didn't end with a gunshot, or a crown, or a name carved into a door. It ended with breath, a laugh, a morning that came without blood. 3 days after we walked out of the Baresi stronghold, Andrea laid the broken crown at the altar of the old Marcorelli chapel. He didn't fix it. He didn't melt it down. He left it shattered, exactly as it was sent to us, a reminder that the kingdom we fought for wasn't made of gold or title. It was made of us. "I thought I'd die with this name," he said softly, standing beside me. "You still might." His mouth curved, but not today. The twins ran through the halls like nothing had changed. Marco followed behind them, too serious, too grown, pretending not to smile when Sophia shrieked with joy over something invisible. I stood at the edge of the garden, hands tucked into my coat, watching them under morning sun that didn't feel borrowed anymore, just earned. Andrea joined me after a moment. "They'll never know how close it came." I looked at him. They don't need to. Because this was the ending they tried to steal from us, the one we weren't supposed to get, the one I never believed we'd live to see. But somehow, we did. Andrea took my hand, his thumb brushing the old scar on my wrist, the one left from the chain they used to restrain me before our daughter was born. "You once told me you ran straight into the fire." "I did." "You're still burning." I smiled. "So are you." Later that afternoon, we gathered the council. Not just the Marcorelli loyalists, the remaining Baresi men too. Not as enemies, not even as allies, as witnesses. Andrea stood at the head of the long table. I stood beside him. Luca passed out sealed documents, and when Andrea spoke, it was with a voice the room would remember for the rest of their lives. "I built this empire on blood," he said, "but I refuse to bury my son in it." He turned to Marco, who stood straighter under the weight of his father's gaze. "This name, Marcorelli, does not die today, but it changes, because the future does not belong to ghosts. It belongs to the living." Gasps rippled through the room when Andrea stepped back and let Marco sit in his chair. 10 years old, uncrowned, unproven, but ready. "He'll learn from me," Andrea said. "From Luca, from her." He looked at me when he said it. Not like I was support, like I was sovereign. We left the room without waiting for applause. The power wasn't in ceremony anymore. It was in legacy, in choice. And for the first time in years, Andrea chose life over death. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, I stood at the window in our room, watching the candlelight flicker across the courtyard. Andrea wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Did we win?" I asked. "No." My brows pulled in. He kissed my neck softly. "We didn't win. We survived. That's better." I turned in his arms, looked up into the face that once terrified me, the face I now knew better than my own. "I never asked for this," I whispered. "I know. But I'd choose it again." He touched my face like I was breakable, even now, even after everything. "I'd lose it all for you," he said. "But you didn't," I replied. He smiled. "No, I didn't." We didn't sleep right away. We made love slow, desperate, silent, not like the end, like a beginning. And when it was over, he curled around me the way he only did in the darkest hours, his heartbeat steady against my back. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "you wake as my wife." I froze. He kissed my shoulder. Legally, publicly, completely. My voice caught. "You never said, 'I was always going to marry you, Gatina. I just didn't want to do it until I was worthy.'" Tears burned behind my eyes. "And now?" I asked. He kissed my temple. "Now I know. You were the crown. I was just trying to catch up." The ceremony was small, private. The twins threw rose petals. Marco walked me down the aisle. Andrea didn't wear black. He wore white, for once. Not as a symbol of innocence, but of rebirth, of what we built together, of what we refused to let die, No empire is without cost, no bloodline without ghosts. But our family didn't live in the shadows anymore. We lived in the after, the peace we carved with our own hands, the home we defended with teeth and fire. And when I laid my head against Andrea's chest that night, listening to the quiet rise and fall of his breath, I thought about the woman I used to be. The nurse. The thief. The fugitive. The girl who stole his son and ran for her life. She didn't die. She evolved into a queen, into a mother, into the woman who stood beside a devil and called it love. Not because he changed, but because I did. They say legacy is what you leave behind, but they were wrong. Legacy is what wakes you in the middle of the night, crying from a dream you can't remember. Legacy is what looks you in the eye and says, was it worth it? Legacy is alive. And in my case, it has Andrea's eyes. My stubbornness, and a fire that no crown will ever tame. Marco turned 17 this week. He's taller than Andrea now, just barely, but walks like his father. Talks like me when he's angry. The boy I raised in hiding, the child I risked everything to save, is gone. In his place stands a man, not yet king, but no longer just heir. Andrea took him to Sicily last year for 3 weeks, training, alliances, a lesson in fear and respect. Marco came back quieter, sharper. He doesn't laugh as easily now, but when he wraps his arms around me, I still feel the little boy who once asked if it was safe to come home. Sophia turned 15 last month. She wears combat boots with her school uniform and keeps a blade hidden in her boot like it's just another pencil. Andrea pretends not to notice, but I've caught him watching her spar with Luca in the courtyard, pride simmering beneath the fear he'll never admit to. She's too smart, too fearless, and far too much like the woman he married. She'll never sit quietly, never kneel. She's the future of this house in ways Marco isn't, not because of blood, because of fire. And then there's Vittoria, also 15, born in chains, birthed under threat, raised in peace. She's the softest of the three, but that makes her the most dangerous because she doesn't raise her voice, she doesn't flinch, she just knows. Andrea says she's the one he fears most, and I believe him. Because that little girl watched the world try to kill her before she took her first breath. And she smiled anyway. They don't know everything. Not yet, but they've read the files. They've asked the questions, and Andrea doesn't lie. Not anymore. Not to them, because we didn't survive all of this just to pretend it didn't happen. Some nights, Andrea still walks the grounds like the ghosts never left. I'll find him in the chapel, lighting candles for enemies he didn't want to kill but had to. He doesn't cry. Not for them. Not even for the men who died with his name on their lips. But once, he cried for me. After our first real fight, years ago before the peace held, when I told him I hated what this life might make of our children, he sat in silence for hours. Then came to me, eyes red, voice quiet. I don't want them to become me, he whispered. I took his hand. They won't, I said. They'll become us. Now I watch them grow into people who were never meant to exist. Children born of war, raised in fire, forged in love, the impossible kind, the kind they tried to destroy. We've been married almost a decade now. I still don't wear the ring every day. Sometimes it rests on the bedside table, next to a knife and a journal with too many blacked-out pages. But Andrea never asks me to wear it. He just wears his, like it's fused to his skin. Luca retired 2 years ago. He still visits, still drinks too much wine and spoils the kids with stories that are only half true. The other half? Too bloody for bedtime. Andrea doesn't run the way he used to. Not because he's softer, but because he doesn't have to. The world bends for him now. Not out of fear, out of respect, out of memory. Out of the unshakable truth that he didn't just survive the war, he won it. And then chose to build something softer in its place. Sometimes I think about the girl I was, the one who ran with a baby and nothing else. The one who lied, who stole, who broke every rule she swore she believed in. She was terrified. But she kept going. Because she had no choice. Because she knew if she stopped, she'd die. I don't miss her. But I honor her. Because she got me here. To this. To him. To them. And maybe that's what legacy really is. Not just what you leave behind, but what you build while you're still here. When I walk through the garden now, I can hear laughter. Not gunfire. Not screaming. Just laughter. From the children we created. The kingdom we protected. The family that lived. And sometimes, when Andrea wraps his arms around me from behind and kisses my neck, when Marco smirks like he's already 10 steps ahead, when Sophia knocks a guard on his butt just to prove she can, when Vittoria curls up beside me with her nose in a book thicker than my arm. I remember what it cost, what it nearly destroyed. And I smile anyway, because in the end, they didn't break us. They crowned us. They survived the fire, they built a family in the ashes, and when the world tried to erase them, they gave it a kingdom instead. Thank you for listening to the Devil's Heir series. If you loved this story, don't forget to subscribe. The next war is coming.